I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have filled up before leaving the city. The thought gnawed at me as I squinted at the fuel gauge, its needle dipping dangerously close to empty. The vast expanse of Highway 50 stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren Nevada desert. They don't call it the loneliest road in America for nothing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I scanned the horizon for any sign of civilization. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, but its beauty was lost on me. All I could think about was finding a gas station before I ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere. I'd made this drive dozens of times before, but something felt off. The usual landmarks I used to gauge my progress were nowhere to be seen. Had I missed a turn somewhere? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fatigue that had settled over my mind during the long hours of driving. Come on, I muttered, willing a gas station to materialize in the distance. My eyes flicked constantly between the road ahead and the fuel gauge, watching with growing dread as the needle crept ever closer to E. Just as panic began to set in, I spotted a faint glow on the horizon. My heart leaped. It had to be a town, or at least a truck stop. I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to close the distance. Minutes ticked by, but the glow didn't seem to get any closer. I frowned, double-checking my speedometer. Yep, still doing 70. So why did it feel like I was crawling along? The sky darkened rapidly, as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the world. I flicked on my headlights, and that's when things got really weird. The beam illuminated maybe 20 feet of road ahead of me, and beyond that, nothing. Just an inky void where the horizon should be. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the darkness remained. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the glow I'd been chasing had disappeared. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it behind me now, but there was only more darkness. What the hell is going on? I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence of the car. That's when I noticed the fuel gauge. The needle was dropping faster now, visibly sinking towards empty as I watched. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. Even if I'd miscalculated my remaining fuel, it shouldn't be vanishing this quickly. I eased off the gas, hoping to conserve what little fuel I had left. The darkness pressed in around me, making me feel claustrophobic despite the open road. I reached for the radio, desperate for some sound to break the oppressive silence. Static bursts from the speakers, startling me so badly I nearly swerved off the road. I quickly turned the volume down, but left it on. Even the harsh white noise was preferable to the eerie quiet. As I fumbled with the radio, trying to find a clear station, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I looked up, my heart pounding, but saw nothing but empty roads stretching into the darkness. Get it together, I told myself firmly. You're just tired. Everything's fine. But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. Everything was most definitely not fine. The minutes crawled by, each one ratcheting up my anxiety. I'd long since passed the point where I should have reached the next town, but there was still no sign of life. Just an endless stretch of road, swallowed up by darkness mere feet in front of my car. I was so focused on the fuel gauge and the impenetrable blackness ahead that I almost missed it. A pinprick of light in my rearview mirror, growing larger by the second. Relief washed over me. Another car, I wasn't alone out here after all. I eased onto the shoulder, ready to flag them down for help. But as the lights grew closer, that relief curdled into dread. They were approaching far too fast, and there were too many of them. This wasn't a car, it was a truck. A massive one, bearing down on me like a freight train. I yanked the wheel, pulling back onto the road. The truck was closing the distance at an impossible speed. My hands shook as I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, but it was no use. The needle was hovering just above E, and my car sputtered in protest at the sudden demand for speed. The truck's headlights filled my rearview mirror, so bright I could barely see. The static from the radio grew louder, building to a deafening roar that matched the thunder of the approaching vehicle. No, 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 I chanted, searching desperately for somewhere to turn off, somewhere to hide. But there was nowhere to go. Just an endless stretch of road and that terrifying void of darkness ahead. The truck was so close now, I could feel the vibrations through my seat. I braced for impact, squeezing my eyes shut, and nothing. The roar of the engine faded. The blinding light disappeared. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, to find nothing had changed. The road stretched out before me, my headlights illuminating that same 20-foot stretch before being swallowed by darkness. I pulled over, my whole body shaking. What just happened? Had I imagined it all? As my racing heart began to slow, I noticed something that made it skip a beat. The fuel gauge. It was completely empty now, the needle buried deep in the red. By all rights, my car should have sputtered to a stop miles ago. Yet here I was, still moving forward into that impenetrable darkness. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to make sense of what was happening. Minutes, hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in this strange, dark place. Eventually, I put the car back in drive. What else could I do? I couldn't stay here forever, and going back wasn't an option. The only way out was through. As I pulled back onto the road, the static from the radio suddenly cleared. A voice came through, scratchy and distant, but unmistakably human. "Hello, can anyone hear me? I'm stuck out here on Highway 50. If anyone's out there, please help." I nearly drove off the road in shock. It was my voice, my words, the exact message I'd been thinking of trying to broadcast. "This isn't real," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "It's just a dream. You'll wake up any second now." But I didn't wake up. The road kept unspooling before me, an endless ribbon leading into nothingness. The radio continued to broadcast my unspoken pleas for help, growing clearer and more desperate with each passing minute. I don't know how long I drove. Hours blended together in that timeless void. The fuel gauge remained stubbornly on empty, but my car kept moving. The radio cycled through my voice, static and brief snatches of music I almost recognized before fading back into white noise. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was seriously considering driving straight into the darkness in hopes of ending this nightmare, I saw it. A sign illuminated by my headlights. GAS, food, lodging, next exit, I laughed. A sound of pure relief that quickly turned hysterical. An exit, civilization. Maybe this ordeal was finally coming to an end. I slowed as I approached the exit ramp, peering into the darkness for any sign of the promised services. As I turned off the highway, my headlights swept across another sign. My laughter died in my throat as I read the words, "Welcome to Highway 50, the loneliest road in America." The exact same sign I'd passed at the start of my journey. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. My car sailed past the sign and back onto the familiar stretch of Highway 50. The fuel gauge reset to full. The darkness receded, revealing the Nevada desert bathed in the light of the setting sun. Everything was back to normal, except me. As I drove on, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond the reach of my headlights, waiting for the sun to set, waiting for me to run out of gas, waiting to welcome me back to the endless night of Highway 50. Story 2. The first time I noticed something was off, I brushed it aside. Night shift does funny things to your mind, after all. But now, as I sit here in the flickering glow of the security monitors, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in this building. And whatever's here with me, it isn't supposed to be. My name's Mike, and I've been working night security at Crimson Tower for about 6 months now. It's a pretty sweet gig, all things considered. 12 hours a night, 5 nights a week, watching over an empty office building. Most nights, the hardest part of my job is staying awake. Tonight, though, sleep is the furthest thing from my mind. It started small. A coffee mug, left on a desk, that I could have sworn wasn't there during my first rounds. The faint smell of cologne lingering in a hallway that should have been empty for hours. Little things that were easy to explain away. Maybe the cleaning crew moved something. Maybe some workaholics stayed late and I just missed them leaving. But then things started getting weird. About a month ago, I was doing my usual 2 a.m. walkthrough when I heard it. A soft thud, like something heavy being set down, coming from one of the upper floors. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the flashlight on my belt. The sound echoed through the empty building, seeming to grow louder in the silence that followed. "Hello?" I called out, wincing at how my voice cracked. "This is security. Anyone there?" No answer. Just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of my own heart. I took the elevator up to the floor where I thought the sound had come from. The door slid open with a cheerful ding that felt obscenely loud in the silent hallway. I stepped out, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing seemed out of place. Rows of cubicles stood silent and empty. Conference room doors were closed, their little occupied vacant signs all showing green. I was about to chalk it up to my imagination when I saw it. A single footprint in the thick carpet, right in the middle of the hallway. It was larger than mine, and the deep impression suggested someone heavier, someone who shouldn't be here. I radioed down to the lobby desk, but got only static in response. Great. I was on my own. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the flashlight, slowly making my way down the hall. Each cubicle was a potential hiding spot, each shadow a threat. I checked every nook and cranny, but found nothing. No intruder, no signs of forced entry. Just that single, unexplainable footprint. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I debated whether to mention it in my report. In the light of dawn, it all seemed so ridiculous. I'd probably just spooked myself over nothing, so I kept quiet and tried to put it out of my mind. But I couldn't. Not entirely. And over the next few weeks, more little oddities kept piling up. Papers rearranged on desks. Chairs pulled out as if someone had just stood up. Once, I could have sworn I heard the distant clack of a keyboard coming from an empty office. Each incident on its own was nothing, but together, it was starting to paint a disturbing picture. I began paying closer attention during my rounds, noting every detail. That's when I started noticing the patterns. It was always the same few floors where things seemed off, always in areas without security cameras, always in places where someone could easily hide if they heard me coming. Last night, things escalated. I was checking the 14th floor, one of the hotspots for weird occurrences, when I saw it, a shadow, just at the edge of my flashlight beam, ducking into a conference room. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. Proof that I wasn't going crazy. "Stop right there," I shouted, breaking into a run. I reached the conference room door in seconds, yanking it open. Empty. The room was completely empty, but the chair at the head of the table was spinning slowly, as if someone had just vacated it. I stood there, panting, as the imprecations sank in. Someone was here. Someone was playing games with me, and they were damn good at not getting caught. That brings us to tonight. I'm watching the monitors like a hawk, my eyes burning from the strain. Every so often, I do a sweep of the building, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The air feels thick, charged with a tension I can't explain. I've just finished another round, and I'm heading back to the security office when I hear it. Footsteps, soft, but unmistakable, coming from the floor above me. My breath catches in my throat. Do I call it in? But who would believe me? I've got no proof, nothing concrete to report. Just a bunch of hunches and unexplained noises. No, this is my chance to finally get to the bottom of this. I take a deep breath, unclip my flashlight, and head for the stairs. The stairwell is dark, lit only by dim, emergency lighting. Each step seems to creak under my weight, no matter how carefully I tread. I reach the next floor and pause, listening. There it is again. Footsteps, moving away from me. I ease the door open and step into the hallway. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating a scene that's both familiar and deeply wrong. Everything is in its place, neat and orderly, but there's a feeling in the air, a sense of recent disturbance that sets my nerves on edge. I move slowly down the hall, checking each room as I pass. Empty, 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 empty. But the footsteps continue, always just around the next corner, always just out of sight. I'm nearing the end of the hall when I see it. A door, slightly ajar, when I know for a fact it was closed during my last round. My pulse quickens as I approach. "This is security," I call out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come out with your hands up." Silence. I reach for the door, my hand trembling slightly. With a deep breath, I push it open. The office beyond is dark, lit only by the glow of a computer monitor. And there, silhouetted against the screen, is a figure. My flashlight beam falls on them, and for a moment, I'm frozen in shock. Because the face that turns to look at me is mine. It's me, but not me. The eyes are too dark, the smile too wide. As I stand there, gaping, my doppelganger speaks. "Took you long enough, Mike," it says, my own voice sending chills down my spine. "I was starting to think you'd never figure it out." I stumble backward, my mind reeling. This can't be real. It can't be happening. The other me stands, moving with a fluid grace that seems wrong, inhuman. "Don't be afraid," it says, still smiling that too wide smile. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to replace you." "What? What are you?" I manage to choke out. It chuckles, the sound all wrong coming from my own mouth. "I'm the night shift, Mike. The real night shift. We've been here all along, living in the spaces between. And now, it's time for a change of guard." I turn to run, but the door slams shut before I can reach it. I spin back around, but the office is empty. The computer screen flickers and goes dark. For a long moment, I stand there in the darkness, my heart pounding. Then, slowly, I become aware of sounds, footsteps, voices, the hum of machinery coming to life. I rush to the window and look out. The sky is lightening with the approach of dawn, but the streets below are wrong. The cars are older models, the storefronts unfamiliar. As I watch, people begin to emerge from the surrounding buildings, dressed in clothes that look decades out of date. With trembling hands, I pull out my phone. No signal. The date on the screen reads June 15th, 1985. A knock at the door makes me jump. "Everything all right in there, Mike?" calls a voice. My voice. From the other side. "Your shift's over. Time to clock out." I back away from the door, my mind racing. This can't be happening. It can't be real. But as the door begins to open, I realize with growing horror that it is. The night shift is over. And somehow, I've been left behind. Story 3. The forest had eyes. I was sure of it now. What had started as a peaceful solo hike was quickly turning into something far more sinister. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking in circles, led astray by something that didn't want me to leave. It was supposed to be a simple day trip. A chance to clear my head and enjoy some solitude after a stressful week at work. I've done this hike a dozen times before, always sticking to the well-marked trail that looped through Whispering Pines State Park. But somehow, things had gone terribly wrong. I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a gnarled oak tree. Sweat trickled down my back despite the cool autumn air. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long swig, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "Okay, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "Think. How did you get here?" I cast my mind back, trying to pinpoint where I'd gone off track. The hike had started normally enough. I'd arrived at the trailhead around noon, the parking lot nearly empty on a Tuesday. The familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth had greeted me as I set off, my boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path. For the first hour or so, everything had been fine. I'd passed the usual landmarks, the split rock formation, the wooden bridge over Cricks Creek, the ancient hemlock tree with initials carved into its trunk. But then, I frowned, struggling to remember. It was like there was a haze over my memories, obscuring the details. I recalled passing a trail marker, but the color had been off. Not the usual bright blue, but a deeper, almost purple hue. Had that been where things started to go wrong? Shaking my head, I pushed off from the tree and kept walking. Standing still wouldn't get me anywhere. I just needed to find another trail marker, get my bearings, and I'd be fine. But as I trudged on, the forest seemed to grow denser. The trees pressed in closer, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more and more of the fading sunlight. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying an unfamiliar, musty scent that made my nose wrinkle. Just as I was about to stop and try to retrace my steps, I spotted it. A flash of color through the trees. A trail marker. Relief flooded through me as I quickened my pace. I burst through a tangle of bushes, ignoring the thorns that snagged at my clothes. There it was, a wooden post with a painted blaze. But as I drew closer, my relief turned to confusion. The marker was blue, yes, but it was the exact same shade as the one I'd passed. How long ago? An hour? 2? I couldn't be sure, but I knew with unsettling certainty that it was identical. Right down to the chip in the wood on the upper right corner. "This isn't possible," I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness of the forest. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. But there was nothing there. Just more trees, their shadows lengthening as the day waned. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, carried on a breeze that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah. My name, breathed, by a voice that sounded like rustling leaves and creaking branches. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over an exposed root. "Who's there?" I called out, hating how my voice shook. This isn't funny. Silence. Just the pounding of my own heart and the distant call of a crow. I turned in a slow circle, straining my eyes to peer into the deepening gloom between the trees. Was that movement I saw just at the edge of my vision? A flicker of something pale, ducking behind a trunk. "Get it together," I muttered, squeezing my eyes shut for a moment. "You're freaking yourself out over nothing." But when I opened my eyes, the forest had changed. The trees seemed to loom larger, their bark darker and rougher. Shadows pooled at their bases, deeper than they should be. And the trail was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun around, searching desperately for any sign of the path, but there was nothing. Just an endless sea of trees, all looking disturbingly similar. I fumbled for my phone, cursing as I remembered I'd turned it off to conserve battery. As the screen flickered to life, my stomach dropped. No signal. And the time read 12 p.m. The exact time I'd started my hike. "This isn't real," I said, my voice rising. "This can't be happening." As if in response, a wind whipped up, sending dead leaves swirling around my feet. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of inhuman voices calling my name. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I had no idea which direction I was going, no plan beyond a primal need to escape. The voices pursued me, growing louder, more insistent. "Sarah. Stay with us, Sarah." I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Shapes moved in the darkness between the trees. Tall, spindly figures that seemed to be made of shadow and mist. They flowed after me, their movements too fluid to be natural. A scream built in my throat, but before it could escape, my foot caught on something. I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping. Slowly, I pushed myself up, spitting out dirt and leaves. And that's when I saw it. A cabin, squat and wooden, with a sagging porch and shuttered windows. It stood in a small clearing, as if the trees had parted just to make room for it. Warm light spilled from cracks in the shutters, promising safety. I scrambled to my feet, glancing behind me. The shadow figures were closer now, their outlines becoming more defined. I could make out long, gnarled fingers reaching for me. Without another thought, I sprinted for the cabin. My lungs burned as I crossed the clearing, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. I grabbed the door handle, praying it wasn't locked. It turned easily under my hand. I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. For a moment, I leaned against it, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Gradually, I became aware of my surroundings. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A rough wooden table, a couple of chairs, a stone fireplace with embers glowing softly. It looked old, but well maintained, almost lived in. "Hello," I called out cautiously. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the crackle of the fire and the faint whisper of wind outside. I moved further into the room, my footsteps creaking on the wooden floorboards. There was a scent in the air, familiar but out of place. Pine needles and damp earth, like the forest outside, but stronger, fresher. My eyes were drawn to the table. A piece of paper lay there, weighted down by a smooth river stone. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. My blood ran cold as I read the words scrawled across it. "Welcome home, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." The handwriting was my own. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, the paper fluttering from my nerveless fingers. There, emerging from the shadows in the corner of the room, was me. But not me as I was now, mud-stained and wild-eyed. This was an older version of myself, with grey streaking my hair and lines etched deep around eyes that held an unsettling, fey light. I smiled, and when she spoke, her voice was a blend of my own and the whispers from the forest. "Don't be afraid," she said, reaching out a hand. "You're exactly where you're meant to be." What is this place?" I managed to choke out. Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. "It's home, Sarah. The forest has chosen you, just as it chose me. Years ago, or perhaps years from now. Time works differently here." I backed away, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. I don't believe you." "You will," she said simply. "In time, you'll understand. You'll become part of it, just as I did. Just as we all do." As she spoke, more figures emerged from the shadows. Men and women of all ages, all with that same otherworldly look in their eyes. And behind them, moving with that unnatural fluidity, were the shadow creatures from the forest. I reached for the door handle, but found only smooth wood. The door was gone. "Don't fight it," my other self said, still smiling that too wide smile. "The forest always gets what it wants. And it wants us, Sarah, all the lost souls who wander its paths. We're its eyes, its voice." As the figures closed in around me, their whispers rising to a deafening crescendo, I felt something inside me begin to change. The fear drained away, replaced by a strange sense of belonging, of rightness. I looked at my hand, watching as my skin seemed to ripple and shift, taking on the texture of bark. And as the last of my humanity slipped away, I finally understood. I was home. I was the forest. And somewhere out there, another lost hiker was about to stumble upon a trail marker that wasn't quite right. Story 4. The first time I saw our new neighbor, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But as I watched the rest of Maple Street welcome him with open arms, I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked and kids played freely in the streets. What could possibly go wrong? I realize now how naive that thought was. My name's Ethan, and I've lived on Maple Street all my life. It's your typical suburban neighborhood. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, the whole 9 yards. Nothing ever really happens here, which is why the arrival of Mr. Thorne caused such a stir. He moved into the old Wilkinson place at the end of the street. It had been empty for years, ever since old Mrs. Wilkinson passed away. The day the moving truck pulled up, half the neighborhood was out on their porches, watching with barely concealed curiosity. I remember standing in my front yard, ostensibly watering the roses, but really just trying to get a glimpse of our mysterious new neighbor. The truck was nearly empty when he finally appeared. Mr. Thorne was tall and lean, with sultan pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. He moved with an odd, fluid grace that made him seem younger than his apparent years. As he approached the growing crowd of onlookers, a smile spread across his face. It was a nice smile, I suppose, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Well, hello there, neighbors," he called out, his voice warm and rich. "I'm Gregory Thorne. It's a pleasure to meet you all." A chorus of greetings rose up from the assembled neighbors. My next-door neighbor, Susan, stepped forward with a plate of her famous snickerdoodles. "Welcome to Maple Street, Mr. Thorne," she said, beaming. "We're so glad to have you here." As Thorn accepted the cookies, his eyes locked with mine for a brief moment. In that instant, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. There was something in his gaze, a hunger, a calculation that set my teeth on edge. But then he looked away, and the moment passed. I shook my head, trying to dispel the odd feeling. I was just being silly, letting my imagination run wild. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thorn became a fixture in the neighborhood. He was charming, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. He joined the neighborhood watch, volunteered at the local school, even helped old Mr. Johnsley repaint his fence. Everyone loved him. Everyone except me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was little things at first. The way neighborhood pets would shy away from him, hackles raised. The way plants seemed to wilt slightly when he walked by. The way his shadow sometimes seemed to move independently of his body, just for a split second. But every time I tried to point these things out to someone else, they looked at me like I was crazy. "Oh, Ethan," my wife, Lisa, would say with a laugh. "You and your overactive imagination. Mr. Thorn is a sweetheart. You should really give him a chance." So I tried. I really did. But the more I interacted with Thorn, the stronger my unease became. It was about a month after Thorn's arrival that I first noticed the changes in my neighbors. Subtle things at first. A blank look in their eyes that would quickly vanish. A slight delay in their responses during conversations. But as time went on, the changes became more pronounced. Susan, always so bubbly and outgoing, grew quiet and withdrawn. Mr. Johnson stopped tending to his prized rose garden. The Thompsons' kids, usually out playing from dawn till dusk, were nowhere to be seen. And through it all, Mr. Thorn smiled that same unsettling smile. I tried talking to Lisa about it, but she just brushed off my concerns. "Everyone's just busy, Ethan," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Stop being so paranoid." But I couldn't. Not when I saw the vacant look in her eyes, the same look I'd seen in so many of our neighbors. One night, unable to sleep, I stood at our bedroom window, looking out at the street. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the silent houses. As I was about to turn away, movement caught my eye. A figure was moving down the street, stopping at each house. As it passed under a streetlight, I recognized Mr. Thorn. He paused at each driveway, seeming to sniff the air. Then he'd make a gesture, and a shadow would detach itself from the house, following him as he moved on. I rubbed my eyes, certain I must be dreaming. But when I looked again, the scene remained unchanged. Thorn was at our next-door neighbor's house now, Susan and Bob's place. As I watched, two shadow figures emerged from their home, joining the growing procession behind Thorn. My heart pounding, I turned to wake Lisa to show her what was happening, but her side of the bed was empty. A chill ran through me as I realized the implications. I raced downstairs, calling Lisa's name. No response. The front door stood open, letting in the cool night air. I stepped out onto the porch, my bare feet cold against the wooden boards. The street was empty now, no sign of Thorn or his shadowy followers. But there, on our front walk, was a single footprint, Lisa's size. Without thinking, I started following the direction Thorn had gone. The streets were eerily silent, not even the usual chirp of crickets or rustle of leaves. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. As I neared the end of Maple Street, I saw a soft glow coming from the old Wilkinson place, Thorn's house. Shadows flickered across the drawn curtains, and a low hum filled the air, just on the edge of hearing. I crept closer, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. As I reached the edge of Thorn's property, I heard voices, chanting, low and rhythmic, and underneath it all, a sound that made my blood run cold. Lisa's voice, calling my name. Ethan. Ethan, help me. I rushed forward, all caution forgotten. I had to save her, to save all of them. I burst through the front door, ready to confront Thorn and whatever madness he had brought to our quiet street. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. The interior of the house had been transformed. Gone were the quaint furnishings and floral wallpaper. In their place was a vast, cavernous space that couldn't possibly fit inside the house I knew. And there, in the center of it all, stood Mr. Thorn. He was different now. Tollowy's features, sharper, more predatory. His eyes glowed with an inner light, and shadows writhed around him like living things. Surrounding him in a wide circle were my neighbors. All of them. They stood unnaturally still, their eyes vacant, mouths moving in that ceaseless chant. And at Thorn's feet, struggling weakly against invisible bonds, was Lisa. "Ah, Ethan," Thorn said, his voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. "I was wondering when you'd join us. You've been quite the troublesome one, haven't you?" I tried to move, to run to Lisa, but found myself rooted to the spot. Thorn's smile widened, showing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "You see, Ethan, your little community here, it's perfect. So much life, so much energy. It's exactly what I need to feed." As he spoke, tendrils of shadow began to reach out from the still forms of my neighbors, flowing towards Thorn. He seemed to grow larger, more solid, as the shadows touched him. What are you?" I managed to choke out. Thorn laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, I've been called many things over the centuries. Demon, spirit, God. But really, I'm just hungry." He gestured, and I felt myself being pulled forward towards the circle of my entranced neighbors. "Don't fight it, Ethan," Thorn said, almost gently. "It's easier if you don't resist. Just let go, like the others. Let me in." I could feel it then, a pressure in my mind, a presence trying to seep into the cracks of my consciousness. For a moment, I was tempted. It would be so easy to give in, to join the others in their peaceful oblivion. But then I heard Lisa's voice again, weak but determined. "Ethan, don't." That small act of defiance snapped me back to reality. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I pushed back against Thorn's influence. "No," I growled. "You can't have us. You can't have our home." Something flashed in Thorn's eyes. Surprise, and maybe a hint of fear. The pressure in my mind increased, becoming almost unbearable. But I held on, focusing on Lisa, on my neighbors, on everything this monster was trying to take away. And then, like a dam breaking, something shifted. The chanting stopped abruptly. One by one, my neighbors began to blink, confusion replacing the blank looks in their eyes. Thorn let out a roar of frustration and rage. The shadows around him writhed violently, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of his true form. Something ancient and terrible, too big to fully comprehend. But it was fading, growing less substantial by the second. As my neighbors awakened, as their life and energy returned to them, Thorn's power seemed to diminish. "This isn't over," he snarled, his form flickering like a bad TV signal. "I'll be back. There are always more neighborhoods, more communities ripe for the picking." And then, With a sound like a thunderclap, he was gone. The impossible room vanished with him, leaving us standing in the dusty, cobweb-filled interior of the old Wilkinson house. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Lisa was in my arms, sobbing with relief, and our neighbors were looking around in confusion, trying to piece together what had happened. As the first light of dawn broke over Maple Street, I knew our ordeal was over. But I also knew that somewhere out there, in another quiet suburb, a moving truck was pulling up to an empty house, and a charming new neighbor was about to introduce himself, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Story 5. The message glowed on my screen, innocent yet chilling. I'm outside your house. Let's finally meet in person. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. How had it come to this? How had my online friend, my perfect confidant, turned into this lurking threat beyond my front door? It all started 3 months ago. I'm Alex, by the way. Just your average 20-something trying to navigate life in the digital age. I'd been feeling pretty isolated lately, working from home, most of my friends scattered across the country. So when I stumbled across an online forum for vintage synth enthusiasts, it felt like I'd found my tribe. That's where I met Synthwave85. From our very first interaction, it was like we were on the same wavelength. They got all my obscure music references, laughed at my terrible puns, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. We quickly moved from public forum posts to private messages, our conversations flowing effortlessly for hours. Dude, you're like the internet friend I've always wanted but never found, I typed one night, riding high on the thrill of connection. I know exactly what you mean, Synthwave85 replied. It's like we were meant to find each other. Looking back, I should have noticed the first red flag right then. But I was too caught up in the euphoria of finally feeling understood. Our chats became a daily ritual. I'd wake up, grab my coffee, and eagerly check for messages. We'd dissect the latest album releases, debate the merits of analog versus digital, and share our dreams of building the ultimate synth setup. But it wasn't just music talk. Synthwave85 became my confidant, the one I turned to with all my hopes and fears. I don't know, man, I typed one evening, after a particularly rough day at work. Sometimes I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels, like everyone else has it figured out, and I'm just faking it. I get that, came the quick reply. But from everything you've told me, you're doing great. You're passionate, talented. The world just hasn't realized it yet. Their words were a balm to my insecurities. I found myself opening up more and more, sharing details about my life I'd never told anyone else. It felt safe, somehow. After all, Synthwave85 was just a username on a screen, right? Wrong. So wrong. The shift was subtle at first. Synthwave85 started dropping little comments that showed they knew more about me than I remembered sharing. They'd mention a local coffee shop I frequented, or reference a childhood memory I was sure I'd never told them about. How'd you know about that? I asked once, a faint unease stirring in my gut. Oh, you must have mentioned it before, they replied casually. I've got a good memory for details about my friends. I let it slide, chalking it up to my own forgetfulness. But the incidents kept piling up. Synthwave85 seemed to always be online when I was, no matter the time of day. They'd ask about my day before I'd even had a chance to mention what I'd been up to. It was like they had a window into my life. Then came the photos. I'd posted a selfie on my private Instagram, showing off a new synth I'd bought. Not 10 minutes later, Synthwave85 sent me a message. Sweet Jupiterette, looks great in your living room. My blood ran cold. I'd never told them my Instagram handle. and the photo didn't show my living room. Just a close-up of me and the synth. How could they know where it was? "Ah, thanks," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "But how do you see that pic? I don't remember sharing my Insta with you." There was a long pause before their response came through. "My bad, must have mixed you up with someone else. Lots of Jupiter South out there, you know." But I knew. Deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. From that point on, I started paying closer attention to our conversations. I began to notice patterns, little slips that revealed just how much Synthwave 85 knew about me. They'd casually mention things I'd done days ago, referencing conversations I'd had with other people when I was out and about. It was like they were always watching, always listening. I tried to pull back, to create some distance. I made excuses for why I couldn't chat as often, started being more vague in my responses. But Synthwave 85 didn't take the hint. If anything, they became more insistent, more present in my online life. One night, after a week of me being particularly evasive, I received a message that made my skin crawl. "Everything okay, Alex? You seem distant lately. I miss our talks. Maybe we should meet up in person, grab a coffee at Rosie's like you do every Saturday morning. I bet we'd hit it off even better face to face." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I'd never told them my real name, never mentioned Rosie's, or my weekend routine. This was beyond online stalking. Somehow Synthwave 85 was watching me in the real world. With shaking hands, I typed out a response. "Look, I think we need to take a step back. This is getting a little intense for me. I need some space." The reply came almost instantly. "Space, but we're so close, Alex. I thought you understood. We're meant to be in each other's lives. I know everything about you. I am you." A chill ran down my spine. What did that even mean? I slammed my laptop shut, suddenly feeling exposed in my own home. I got up, pacing the room, checking that all the curtains were drawn. Was I overreacting? Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding, a joke taken too far. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next few days were a nightmare of paranoia. I felt watched constantly, jumping at every sound. I changed all my passwords, set my social media to private, even considered changing my phone number. But it didn't matter. Somehow, Synthwave 85 always found a way to reach me. The messages kept coming, growing more erratic and unsettling with each passing day. "Why are you hiding from me, Alex? I saw you at the grocery store today. That green shirt looks good on you. You really shouldn't leave your bedroom window open at night. Anyone could just climb right in. I love how you sing in the shower. Your voice is beautiful." I was at my breaking point. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The life I'd built for myself, the sanctuary of my home, it all felt violated. I was considering going to the police, but what could I tell them? That my online friend knew too much about me, that I felt watched. I had no proof, no way to explain the depth of my fear. And then, tonight, the final message. The one that's left me frozen at my desk, staring at the screen in horror. "I'm outside your house. Let's finally meet in person." My eyes dart to the window, though the curtains are firmly closed. Is Synthwave 85 really out there? Or is this just another mind game, another way to torment me? With trembling fingers, I type a response. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The reply comes quickly, each word making my blood run colder. "I told you, Alex. I am you. The you that you could be, should be. I'm here to help you become that person, to shed all those insecurities and doubts. Don't you see, this is why we connected so deeply. We're the same person. A hysterical laugh bubbles up in my throat. This can't be real. It has to be some kind of sick joke. But as I sit there, paralyzed with indecision, I hear it. A soft knock at the front door. My heart nearly stops. Fight or flight instinct kicks in, and I find myself moving on autopilot. I grab my phone, ready to call 911, and creep towards the door. The knocking comes again, more insistent this time. Alex, I know you're in there. Don't be afraid. I'm here to help you become who you're meant to be. The voice is familiar and foreign all at once. It sounds like me, but wrong. Distorted, as if coming from a bad recording. I reach for the doorknob, my curiosity overriding my terror for just a moment. With a deep breath, I yank the door open, ready to confront my tormentor. But there's no one there, just the empty street, dimly lit by flickering street lamps. I step out onto the porch, looking up and down the road. Nothing, no sign of anyone. As I turn to go back inside, a glint of something on the welcome mat catches my eye. I bend down to look closer, and my blood turns to ice in my veins. It's a small hand mirror, and reflected in its surface is not my face, but a twisted, grinning version of myself. As I watch, horrified, the reflection winks at me. The screen of my phone lights up with a new message. With trembling hands, I read the words that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Welcome to the real you, Alex. I'm in your house now. I'm in your head, and I'm never leaving. I drop the phone, the mirror, everything. I run out into the night, away from my house, away from the thing that wears my face. But even as I flee, I know the truth. There's no escaping Synthwave 85, because Synthwave 85 is me, and I am it, forever entwined in a digital nightmare of my own making. Story 6. The shortcut was supposed to save me time. Instead, it's been hours, and I'm pretty sure I just passed that same burnt-out barn for the third time. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and purple, a sinking feeling settles in my gut. I'm not just lost. I'm trapped in a place that doesn't want to let me go. It all started innocently enough. I'm Jamie, by the way. Just your average office drone, trying to make it home after a soul-crushing day of meetings and spreadsheets. Traffic was a nightmare, as usual. That's when I remembered the old back road my coworker Mark had mentioned. It'll cut your commute in half, he'd said with a wink. Just don't tell everyone, or it'll get as crowded as the highway. So when I saw the unmarked turnoff, I took it without a second thought. The pavement quickly gave way to gravel, then to hard-packed dirt. Trees crowded in on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading daylight. But I wasn't worried. Not yet, anyway. The first sign that something was off came about 20 minutes in. My phone's GPS had been steadily losing signal, the blue dot of my location jumping erratically across the screen. Then, with a quiet beep, it gave up entirely. No signal flashed mockingly at me. Great, I muttered, tossing the useless device onto the passenger seat. Guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way. I pressed on, confident that the road had to lead somewhere eventually. But as the minutes ticked by, a gnawing unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. The scenery never seemed to change. Just endless fields of tall grass on one side, dense forest on the other. And that barn, that damn barn that kept appearing no matter which way I turned. It was a hulking thing, its weathered boards bleached silver grey by years of sun and rain. The roof had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Each time I passed it, I could have sworn it was just a little bit closer to the road, As the last traces of daylight faded, I flicked on my headlights. The beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating a world that seemed increasingly alien. The grasses by the roadside, which had looked normal enough in daylight, now appeared too tall, too dense. They swayed in a wind I couldn't feel, like tentacles reaching for my car. I checked my gas gauge, my heart sinking. The needle hovered just above a quarter tank. How was that possible? I'd filled up just before leaving work. Unless I'd been driving for much longer than I thought. A quick glance at my watch confirmed my fears. 9:47 p.m. I'd left the office at 5:30. Over 4 hours on this godforsaken road, and I was no closer to home. "Okay, Jamie," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin and scared in the confines of the car. "Time to turn around. This shortcut is a bust." I slowed, looking for a place wide enough to make a U-turn. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing motionless in the middle of the road about 50 yards ahead. My foot instinctively moved to the brake, but something made me hesitate. There was something off about the silhouette. It was human-shaped, sure, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms hung down past where knees should be, and the head sat at an unnatural angle on 2 narrow shoulders. As I drew closer, driving at a crawl now, the figure remained perfectly still. My headlights swept across it, and for a split second, I caught a glimpse of its face. Or rather, where its face should have been. A scream caught in my throat as I swerved, narrowly missing the thing. My tires screeched in protest as I floored the accelerator, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck?" I chanted, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I was afraid of what I might see. That thing, running after my car with its tool-long arms and its blank, featureless face. The road twisted and turned, and I took each curve at dangerous speeds. I had to get away, had to find my way back to the real world, with its traffic jams and boring meetings and people with normal goddamn faces. But no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took, that feeling of being watched, of being pursued, never left me. The shadows at the edge of my headlights seemed to writhe and reach for the car. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Tall, spindly shapes flitting between the trees. And always, that barn would appear. Sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, but always there. Always watching with its roof hole more and empty window eyes. I don't know how long I drove like that, caught in a loop of terror and confusion. Minutes blurred into hours as the night grew deeper and darker. My gas gauge dipped lower and lower, a countdown to when I'd be stranded in this nightmare landscape. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I saw it. A light in the distance. Not the sickly glow of the moon that had been my only companion for hours, but a warm, electric light. Civilization, hope surged through me as I sped towards it. As I drew closer, I could make out the source. A gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon in the darkness. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked old, the kind of mom-and-pop operation you don't see much anymore. A faded sign proclaimed Earl's Gas and groceries and peeling paint. But it was open, and right now, that was all that mattered. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, trying to collect myself. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. The night air hit me like a physical force as I stepped out, thick with the smell of gasoline and something else. Something organic and vaguely rotten. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I made my way to the store entrance. Through the grimy windows, I could see a single figure behind the counter. An old man, I thought, though it was hard to make out details. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The interior was cramped and cluttered, shelves stocked with dusty cans and packages that looked like they'd been there for decades. The air was stale, heavy with the same odd smell I'd noticed outside. I approached the counter, where the old man stood with his back to me, seemingly engrossed in a newspaper. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm a bit lost. I was hoping you could give me directions back to the highway." Slowly, so slowly, the figure turned, and as it did, I felt the bottom drop out of my world. It wasn't an old man. It wasn't a man at all. The thing behind the counter had the same blank, featureless face as the figure I'd seen on the road. Its two long arms ended in hands with far too many fingers, all of which were wrapped around a newspaper that I now saw was blank. I stumbled backward, a scream building in my throat. But before I could turn and run, the thing spoke. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the store and echoing in my head. "Welcome to Earl's," it said, in a voice that sounded like rustling leaves and grinding gears. "How can we help you today?" My back hit the door, and I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Outside, I could see more of them now. Dozens of the faceless figures surrounding my car, swaying gently like the tootle grass. The thing behind the counter took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You wanted directions, didn't you? But you are already where you need to be. You took the shortcut, Jamie. You're home now." As it spoke, the walls of the store began to warp and twist. The shelves melted away, revealing the rotting wood of the ever-present barn. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, replaced by the sickly glow of a moon that was suddenly much too large in a sky that was suddenly much too close. I sank to my knees, the last shreds of my sanity threatening to slip away. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, praying that when I opened them, I'd be back in my car, stuck in normal, boring traffic. But when I opened my eyes, the nightmare remained. The faceless figure loomed over me, its blank visage somehow radiating a terrible joy. "Don't worry," it said, reaching for me with those two long arms and too many fingers. "You'll get used to it. We all do, in the end." And as those impossible hands closed around me, I realized the terrible truth. The shortcut hadn't just led me astray, it had led me home. Story 7. The package arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name scrawled in a handwriting that looked eerily familiar. I should have thrown it away. Should have burned it, buried it, anything but open it. But curiosity got the better of me, as it always does. And now, as I sit here staring at tomorrow's photo, I realize I've set something in motion that I don't know how to stop. My name's Charlie, and up until a week ago, my life was boringly normal. I work from home as a graphic designer, live alone in a small apartment, and generally keep to myself. The most exciting thing in my life was binge-watching the latest Netflix series, but all that changed with that damn package. It was a plain brown envelope, unremarkable in every way except for the weight of it. As I picked it up from my welcome mat, I could feel something solid inside, about the size of a postcard. No stamps, no postmark. Just my name and address in that unsettlingly familiar script. I brought it inside, tossing it on the kitchen counter while I made coffee. It sat there, innocuous, yet somehow menacing, as I went about my morning routine. Finally, coffee in hand, I couldn't resist any longer. The envelope tore easily, spilling its contents onto the countertop. A single Polaroid photo fluttered out, landing face down. My heart was pounding as I reached for it. though I couldn't have explained why. It was just a photo, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. I flipped it over, and the mug slipped from my nerveless fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Coffee splashed my bare feet, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on the image in my hand. It was me, a much younger me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sitting on a swing in a playground I didn't recognize. I was smiling at the camera, gap-toothed and carefree, but it was impossible. I'd never been to this playground. I'd never worn the red t-shirt I saw in the picture, and my parents, who documented every moment of my childhood with near-obsessive dedication, had no photos of me at this age. This photo shouldn't exist, but here it was, solid and real in my trembling hands. I turned it over, looking for any clue, any explanation. On the back, in the same handwriting as the envelope, was a single line. Charlie, age 6. The beginning, I spent the rest of that day in a daze. Unable to focus on work, unable to think about anything but that impossible photo. I called my parents, casually asking if they remembered ever taking me to a playground with a red swing set. They didn't. Of course, they didn't. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image of my younger self, smiling at a camera that shouldn't have been there. When my alarm went off the next morning, I stumbled to the front door, half expecting to find another envelope. There was nothing there. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, feeling foolish. It was just a weird prank, I told myself. Nothing to get worked up about. But when I turned back to the kitchen, my heart nearly stopped. There, on the counter where yesterday's photo had been, sat a new Polaroid. With shaking hands, I picked it up. This time, the image showed a slightly older me, maybe 8 or 9. I was in a classroom I didn't remember, standing at a chalkboard, writing something I couldn't quite make out. Again, I was smiling at the camera, but there was something off about the expression. A tension around the eyes that didn't fit a child that age. The back of this photo read, Charlie, age 9. The lesson begins. I sank into a kitchen chair, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. Someone was messing with me. They had to be. But how? I hadn't left my apartment. No one had come in. The photo hadn't been there last night. I was sure of it. As the days went on, the photos kept coming. Each morning, a new one would be waiting on my kitchen counter. Me at 12, awkwardly posing in front of a house I'd never lived in. Me at 15, at a school dance with a girl I'd never met. Me at 18, in a graduation gown from a high school I hadn't attended. Each photo was accompanied by a short caption, always in that same handwriting. The changes begin. The path diverges. The choice is made. I stopped leaving my apartment. Stopped answering calls from friends and family. I was obsessed with the photos, with trying to understand what they meant. How could these images exist of a life I hadn't lived? I taped them to my living room wall in chronological order, creating a timeline of an alternate life. A life where I apparently made different choices, went to different schools, lived in different places. It was me, undeniably me, but not. As the photos progressed, I started noticing more differences. The me in the photos looked happier, more confident, more successful. While I'd struggled through college and bounced between unfulfilling jobs before settling into my current gig, photo me seemed to thrive. I saw images of him, of me, graduating from an Ivy League school, working in a high-rise office, shaking hands with important-looking people. It was like looking at the road not taken, at every missed opportunity and what-if scenario played out in vivid color. and with each new photo, the captions grew more pointed, more accusatory. The success you could have had, the life you threw away, the person you failed to become. I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The photos were all I could think about. Who was sending them? How did they know about a life I'd never lived? And why show me now? Then came the photo that broke me. It showed me, photo me, with a beautiful woman and 2 smiling children, a perfect family portrait. The caption read, "The happiness you'll never know." I lost it. I tore the photos from the wall, screaming incoherently. I tried to rip them up, but they wouldn't tear. I tried to burn them, but they wouldn't light. In desperation, I shoved them all back into the original envelope and ran out of my apartment at 3 a.m., not stopping until I reached the river. With all my strength, I hurled the envelope into the dark water. I watched it sink, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. I'd gotten rid of them. But when I returned home, exhausted and emotionally drained, a new photo was waiting on my counter. This one showed me exactly as I was at that moment. Unshaven, wild-eyed, clothes rumpled. In the photo, I was opening my apartment door. The caption chilled me to my core. Tomorrow, the reckoning. I'm writing this now, huddled in the corner of my living room. The photo sits on the coffee table. A promise or a threat, I'm not sure which. Dawn is breaking outside, the first rays of sun peeking through my blinds. Soon, I'll hear a knock at my door. Soon, I'll come face to face with the me that could have been, the me that should have been. And I don't know if I'll survive the encounter. Because how do you face a version of yourself that got everything right when you got it all so wrong? How do you confront the living embodiment of every mistake you've ever made? I guess I'll find out soon enough. There's a sound in the hallway now. Footsteps, coming closer. A shadow passes under my door. The moment of reckoning is here, and all I can do is pray that when I open that door, I'm strong enough to face whoever is on the other side. Story 8. The last passenger got off 3 stops ago, but the bus keeps going. The driver hasn't said a word, and the city lights outside are getting fewer and farther between. I should have been home hours ago. Instead, I'm trapped on a night bus that seems to have no intention of ever stopping. My name's Lena, and I've taken this route 100 times before. The 42 night bus, last one of the evening, winding its way through the sleepy suburbs before terminating at the central station downtown. It's always been a quiet ride, just a handful of late shift workers and the occasional drunk heading home after last call. Tonight started no different. I boarded at my usual stop, gave a tired nod to the driver, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, and made my way to my favorite seat near the back. The cool vinyl stuck to my bare legs as I sat down, and I suppressed a shiver. The AC was always cranked too high on these night buses. I pulled out my phone, ready to lose myself in mindless scrolling for the next 40 minutes. But as I swiped to unlock it, the screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery. Great. With a sigh, I resigned myself to staring out the window, watching the familiar landscape of my neighborhood roll by. The Johnson's house with its overgrown lawn. The 24-hour diner where I'd spent countless late nights during college. The old movie theater, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. It was as we passed the theater that I first noticed something was off. The marquee, which should have been advertising the latest blockbuster, instead displayed a title I'd never heard of, The Endless Route. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the AC. I shook my head, trying to clear the unease that was settling over me. I was just tired, I told myself. Working late does funny things to your mind. But as the buzz continued on, more discrepancies began to pile up. We passed streets I didn't recognize, buildings that seemed to shimmer and warp at the edges of my vision. The other passengers, who I'd barely registered when boarding, now seemed off somehow. Their faces were obscured, either by hats pulled low or scarves wrapped high, and they sat unnaturally still, like mannequins placed in bus seats. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. That lack of sleep was making me paranoid. But then we blew past my stop without slowing down. "Hey," I called out, standing up and making my way to the front of the bus. "You missed my stop." The driver didn't respond, didn't even glance in my direction. As I got closer, I realized with growing horror that his reflection in the rearview mirror was wrong, distorted, like a face seen through rippling water. I stumbled back to my seat, heart pounding. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I was dreaming. I had to be. But the vinyl seat felt all too real under my fingers, and the rumble of the engine vibrated through my bones. This was no dream. Outside the windows, the city had given way to unfamiliar countryside. Fields of what looked like wheat stretched out on either side, but the stalks were too tall, too densely packed. They swayed in a wind I couldn't feel, looking unsettlingly like thousands of reaching arms. I glanced at my watch, and my stomach dropped. 2:37 a.m. We'd been driving for over 4 hours. How was that possible? A movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. One of the other passengers had turned to look at me. Their face was still in shadow, but I could feel their gaze boring into me. Slowly, deliberately, they raised a finger to where their lips should be, in a shushing motion. I quickly looked away, my skin crawling. What the hell was going on? The bus lurched suddenly, and I gripped the seat in front of me to keep from falling. We were turning onto a narrow road that cut through the wheat field. In the distance, I could see lights. A town, maybe? Hope flared in my chest. Maybe we were finally stopping. As we drew closer, I realized it wasn't a town. It was a truck stop, a gas station, a diner, and what looked like a small motel. The kind of place you see in old movies, where weary travelers rest for the night and sometimes never leave. The bus pulled into the parking lot with a hiss of brakes. For the first time in hours, the driver spoke. "Rest stop," he announced, his voice sounding like gravel being crushed. 15 minutes. The other passengers stood as one, moving with an eerie synchronization towards the exit. I hesitated, unsure. Part of me was desperate to get off this nightmare bus, to feel solid ground under my feet. But another part, a more primal part, screamed that stepping off would be a terrible mistake. In the end, curiosity and the need to use a bathroom won out. I followed the others, my legs shaky after hours of sitting. The night air hit me like a physical force as I stepped off the bus. It was thick, humid in a way that made it hard to breathe. And that smell, like overripe fruit and something metallic. Blood, my mind helpfully supplied, though I tried to push the thought away. The other passengers had already disappeared into the diner. I made my way to the gas station, figuring it would have a restroom. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, the sound jarring in the oppressive silence of the night. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered, shelves stocked with dusty packages and bottles. Behind the counter stood a figure that, at first glance, looked like an old woman. But as I approached, I realized with a jolt that it wasn't a woman at all. It wasn't even human. The thing behind the counter was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, nearly touching the floor. Its head was oddly shaped, too large and with too many angles. and its face. I couldn't look directly at its face without my vision blurring, like my mind was refusing to process what it was seeing. Bathroom. I managed to croak out, my voice sounding strange and small. The thing's head swiveled towards me with a movement too fluid to be natural. It raised one impossibly long arm, pointing to a door at the back of the store. I mumbled a thank you and hurried past, trying not to look at it directly. The bathroom was mercifully normal, if grimy. I splashed water on my face, trying to clear my head. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming, or having some kind of mental break. Maybe I'd been drugged. But deep down, I knew. This was happening as impossible as it seemed. As I made my way back through the store, I noticed something I'd missed before. A rack of postcards near the counter. But these weren't cheerful greetings from cards. Each one showed a scene of subtle wrongness. A forest where the trees bent at impossible angles. A beach with pitch-black sand under a too large moon. A city skyline where the buildings seemed to breathe. I was so absorbed in the unsettling images that I almost missed the sound of the bus's engine starting up. Panic shot through me. They were leaving. I burst out of the store just in time to see the bus pulling away. "Wait!" I screamed, running after it. But it was no use. The bus picked up speed, leaving me alone in the parking lot. Or so I thought. As the taillights disappeared into the distance, I became aware of movement around me. The other passengers, they hadn't gotten back on the bus. They'd been waiting, hidden in the shadows. They began to emerge now, surrounding me in a loose circle. In the harsh glare of the gas station lights, I could finally see their faces clearly. I wish I couldn't. Each face was blank, featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over a vaguely human-shaped skull. Yet somehow, I could feel them looking at me, studying me, hungry. A hand fell on my shoulder, and I whirled around with a scream caught in my throat. It was the thing from the store, its tall long arm easily reaching me from where it stood in the doorway. "Don't worry, dear," it said, in a voice that sounded like rustling paper and grinding bones. "Another bus will be along soon. They always come for those who are lost." As the faceless figures closed in around me, their arms reaching with terrible eagerness, I realized the horrifying truth. I hadn't missed my stop. I'd reached my final destination, and the night bus would keep running, picking up more lost souls, bringing them to this place where the lines between reality and nightmare blur, where the endless route always leads to the same terrifying end. I just pray that you, whoever you are reading this, remember my story the next time you step onto a late-night bus. And if the driver's reflection seems a little off, if the other passengers are too still, too quiet, get off at the next stop. Get off and run. Run before you find yourself on a journey from which there is no return. Story 9. The attic was talking to me again. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, or maybe mice scurrying in the walls. But now, as I lay awake at 3 a.m., listening to the faint whispers and scratches above my head, I knew better. Something was up there. Something that didn't want me here. I'm Megan, by the way. 32, divorced, and currently house-sitting for my best friend Jess, while she's on a month-long European vacation. It was supposed to be a chance for me to get away from my own life for a while, to enjoy a beautiful home in the countryside and maybe do some writing. Instead, it's turned into a waking nightmare. The house itself is gorgeous. A sprawling Victorian mansion that's been in Jess's family for generations. When I first arrived, I was in awe. The wraparound porch, the intricate woodwork, the antique furniture. It was like stepping back in time. "Make yourself at home," Jess had said as she handed me the keys. "Just don't go in the attic. It's not structurally sound." She laughed it off, but there was a tension in her eyes that I should have paid more attention to. For the first few days, everything was perfect. I spent my mornings writing on the porch, afternoons exploring the vast gardens, and evenings curled up by the fireplace with a good book. The silence was a balm after years of city living. But then, on the fourth night, I heard it. A soft thump from above, like something heavy being set down. I froze, my heart suddenly racing. It was nearly midnight, and I was alone in the house. There shouldn't be any noise from the attic. I tried to brush it off. Old houses make noises, right? But as I lay in bed that night, straining my ears, I heard more. Faint scratches, the creak of floorboards. And then, so quiet I almost missed it, a whisper. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, I felt foolish for getting so worked up. I was letting my imagination run wild, that's all. I resolved to put it out of my mind and enjoy my stay. But the noises continued. Each night, they seemed to get a little louder, a little more distinct. The thumps became footsteps, pacing back and forth. The whispers multiplied, like a group of people having a muffled conversation just out of earshot. I called Jess on the fifth day, trying to keep my voice casual as I asked about the attic. "Oh, it's probably just raccoons or something," she said, but her laugh sounded forced. "Seriously, Meg, don't worry about it, and don't go up there, okay? It's not safe." Her words did little to reassure me. If anything, they made me more suspicious. What was she hiding? As the days wore on, I found myself obsessing over the attic. I'd catch myself staring at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. I started noticing other things too. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd see a shadow dart across a doorway or behind a curtain. 1 week into my stay, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was up there. The entrance to the attic was a trap door in the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. It took some effort, but I managed to pull down the folding ladder. As it creaked open, a wave of musty air washed over me, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place. Something old and vaguely metallic. My hands were shaking as I climbed the ladder, flashlight clutched tightly in one fist. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a space cluttered with old furniture and dust-covered boxes. It looked normal, disappointingly so. I stepped off the ladder, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. The air was heavy, making it hard to breathe. As I moved deeper into the attic, my flashlight beam caught something that made me pause. A mirror, taller than me, stood propped against the far wall. Its ornate frame was tarnished with age, but the glass itself was spotless. Unnaturally so, given the dust coating everything else. I approached it slowly, drawn by a morbid curiosity. In the beam of my flashlight, my reflection looked pale and drawn, dark circles under my eyes from nights of fitful sleep. But as I stared, something changed. My reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. But as I watched, horror-struck, my reflection continued to move independently. It raised a hand, pressing it against the glass from the other side. And then it spoke. "We've been waiting for you, Megan." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the attic. It sounded like my voice, but wrong, distorted, with an undercurrent of something inhuman. I turned to run, but found my path blocked. Shadows were coalescing, taking on vaguely human shapes. They moved towards me, their edges blurring and reforming. "Don't leave," the voices whispered, a chorus of distorted versions of my own voice. "Stay with us. Become us," I screamed, swinging my flashlight wildly. It passed through the shadows like there was smoke, but they kept coming. Cold tendrils brushed against my skin, sending shivers of revulsion through me. In my panic, I stumbled, falling backwards. My head struck something hard, and for a moment, the world went dark. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the second-story hallway. The trapdoor to the attic was closed, the ladder nowhere in sight. My flashlight lay beside me, its beam weak and flickering. Had I dreamed it all? Had I fallen from the ladder before even entering the attic? But as I sat up, wincing at the throbbing in my head, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A perfect handprint, dust-free, on the shoulder of my shirt. A handprint that matched my own, but reversed, as if pressed from behind. I fled the house that night, leaving everything behind. I called Jess from a motel 50 miles away, babbling about mirrors and shadows and voices in the attic. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she sighed heavily. "I'm so sorry, Meg," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have warned you. The house, it has a way of getting to people, of showing them things." "What things?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on, Jess?" There was a long pause before she answered. "It's different for everyone. The house. It reflects you. Your fears, your desires, the parts of yourself you tried to hide. Sometimes it shows you other versions of yourself, paths not taken." "That's insane," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. The reflections in the mirror, the familiar yet distorted voices, they had all been me. Or versions of me. "Why'd you let me stay there?" I asked, hurt and anger coloring my voice. I thought maybe it would be different for you," Jess said softly. "It doesn't affect everyone. Some people never notice anything strange." I hoped. She trailed off, but I understood. She had hoped I would be one of the lucky ones, unaffected by whatever strange power the house held. "Don't go back there," Jess said firmly. "I'll make arrangements for someone else to look after the house. Just stay away, Meg. Please," I agreed readily. Wild horses couldn't drag me back to that place. But now, weeks later, as I sit in my small apartment in the city, I find myself thinking about the house, about the attic, and the mirror, and the other versions of myself I glimpsed. Sometimes, when I pass a reflective surface, I catch myself looking a little too long, half expecting to see a smile I'm not making. And in the quiet hours of the night, I swear I can hear whispers, my own voice, but not quite, calling me back. I won't go, of course. I know better than to return to that house, to face whatever waits for me in that attic. But a part of me wonders, what if I did? What would I see in that mirror now? What versions of myself are waiting on the other side? And more terrifyingly, what if I didn't need to go back? What if, by entering that attic, I opened a door that can't be closed? What if those other versions of me, those shadows and whispers, followed me out? As I write this, a chill runs down my spine, because for just a moment, in the reflection of my computer screen, I could have sworn I saw myself smile. And I'm not smiling at all. Story 10. The silence is deafening. I've been in this hotel room for I don't know how long anymore. Hours, days. The clock on the nightstand hasn't moved since I checked in, its hands frozen at 3:17. I've screamed. I've pounded on the walls. I've tried to break the window. Nothing. No sound escapes this room, and nothing from the outside world seems to penetrate it. I'm beginning to wonder if there's still an outside world at all. My name is Daniel. I was a traveling salesman. Cheap suits, cheaper motels, and endless miles of highway. This was supposed to be just another stop on just another forgettable business trip. The Hotel Quietus, a nondescript building on the outskirts of a town whose name I can't even remember now. I should have known something was off from the moment I walked in. The lobby was deserted, no staff behind the front desk, no other guests milling about. Just an old-fashioned key hanging on a hook with my room number on it. 217. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I debated leaving, finding another place to stay, but it had been a long day of driving, and I was dead on my feet. I figured someone would show up eventually to check me in properly. So I took the key and made my way to the elevator. The ride up to the second floor was unsettling. The elevator moved so smoothly I could barely tell it was moving at all, and there was no music, no hum of machinery, just that oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. Room 217 was at the end of a long hallway, the carpet a faded floral pattern that had seen better days. As I approached, I could have sworn the door seemed to ripple like heat waves rising off hot asphalt. I blinked hard, chalking it up to exhaustion. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and I stepped inside. It was a standard hotel room, king-size bed, desk, TV, small bathroom off to the side. Nothing special, but clean and seemingly comfortable. I set down my suitcase and flopped onto the bed, not even bothering to take off my shoes. I was asleep within minutes. I woke to darkness and confusion. The room was pitch black, no light coming in from around the curtains. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. In fact, the nightstand itself seemed to be missing. "What the hell?" I muttered, sitting up. My voice sounded strange, muffled, as if I was speaking underwater. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, expecting my feet to hit carpet. Instead, they met. Nothing. I jerked back, heart pounding. Carefully, I reached out with one hand, feeling for the edge of the bed. I found it, but beyond was just empty space. Panic rising in my throat, I scooted back to the center of the bed. This couldn't be happening. I must still be dreaming. "Hello," I called out, louder this time. "Is anyone there?" No response. Not even an echo. It was as if the sound died the moment it left my lips. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Okay, Daniel," I said aloud, needing to hear something, anything in this oppressive silence. "Think. What's the last thing you remember?" I cast my mind back. Checking in, or rather, not checking in. The empty lobby, the elevator ride, entering the room, falling asleep, and then nothing. Just this impenetrable darkness and silence. Slowly, cautiously, I began to feel around the bed. It was still there, solid and real under my hands. That was something, at least. A tether to reality in this sea of nothingness. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to make out shapes. The outline of what must be the TV. The vague silhouette of a chair. Relief washed over me. The room was still here. I wasn't floating in some void. I steeled myself and slid off the bed. This time, my feet hit Solomon floor. The carpet felt different, thicker. Somehow, but it was there. I took a tentative step, then another. My hands out in front of me, I made my way to where I thought the light switch should be. My fingers brushed against the wall, cool and smooth. I felt along it until I found the switch and flicked it on. Light flooded the room, so bright it was almost painful after the total darkness. I squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust. As they did, my relief turned to confusion, then to dawning horror. The room was wrong. Everything was just slightly off. The proportions were skewed, the corners not quite right angles. The floral pattern on the wallpaper seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at it. And the door that should lead out to the hallway was gone. I spun around, heart racing. The window was still there, thank God. I rushed to it, yanking open the curtains. My scream died in my throat. Beyond the glass was not the parking lot I'd seen when I checked in, not the streetlights and passing cars I'd expected. There was nothing. An endless expanse of grey, featureless void. I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. I pinched myself, hard. Nothing changed. "Wake up," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "Come on, Daniel, wake up." But I didn't wake up. The bizarre room remained, its walls seeming to pulse gently, like a living thing breathing. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Minutes, hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in this place. Eventually, I forced myself to move, to explore this impossible space I found myself in. The bathroom was still there, but when I turned on the tap, nothing came out. The TV turned on, but showed only static. My suitcase was gone, as was my phone, my wallet, anything that connected me to the outside world. I tried shouting again, pounding on the walls, throwing the desk chair at the window. The glass didn't even crack. And through it all, that suffocating silence persisted. No matter how much noise I made, it seemed to be swallowed up instantly. As my panic subsided into a kind of numb disbelief, I began to notice more details. The clock on the nightstand, perpetually showing 3:17. The way the lights seemed to dim and brighten of their own accord. The faint, almost subliminal whisper that sometimes seemed to come from the walls themselves. I've lost track of how long I've been here now. I've slept a few times, I think, though it's hard to be sure without any way to mark the passage of time. The lights never fully go out, and that grey void outside the window never changes. I've tried everything I can think of to escape. I've searched every inch of the room for hidden doors or panels. I've tried to break through the walls, to pry up the floorboards. Nothing works. It's like the room repairs itself when I'm not looking. The worst part is the silence. It's not just the absence of sound, it's like a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. Sometimes I catch myself talking out loud, just to hear something, anything. But my voice sounds wrong, distorted, like it's coming from very far away. I've started to wonder if I'm dead, if this is some kind of afterlife or purgatory. But why this? Why a hotel room of all places? As I sit here on the bed, staring at the unchanging void outside the window, a terrible thought occurs to me. What if I'm not the first person to be trapped here? What if this room has claimed other victims, other travelers who checked in and never checked out? I think about the key hanging in the empty lobby, about how easy it was to just walk in and take it. Was that by design? Is this place some kind of trap, luring in unsuspecting guests? And then, an even more chilling thought hits me. What if I'm not really alone in here? What of those whispers I sometimes hear? Those movements I catch out of the corner of my eye are the remnants of those who came before me. Souls trapped in this liminal space, unable to move on. As if in response to my thoughts, I feel a sudden chill. The lights flicker, and for just a moment, I swear I see a figure reflected in the TV screen. A pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes, staring right at me. I whirl around, but there's no one there. My heart is pounding as I write this. I found a notepad and pen in the desk drawer, and I've been documenting everything. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I have to do something, have to leave some record of what's happening to me. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found your way into room 217 of the Hotel Quietus, get out. Get out now, while you still can. Don't let the silence fool you. Don't let the room trap you. And if it's too late, if you're already caught like I am, then I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But know that you're not alone. Somewhere in this impossible space, in this room that defies all logic and reason, I'm here too. We're all here, trapped in the quiet, and the quiet is hungry for more. Story 11. The road sign said, "Welcome to Millbrook." But this sure as hell wasn't the Millbrook I remembered. As our family sedan crawled down the eerily empty main street, a chill ran down my spine. The buildings looked decades out of date. The few people visible moved with an unsettling synchronicity. And worst of all, everyone was staring at us. I'm Jack, by the way. Just your average dad on what was supposed to be a fun family road trip with my wife, Sarah, and our kids, Ethan and Lily. We were heading to Sarah's parents' place a few states over, and Millbrook was meant to be nothing more than a quick pit stop. Grab some snacks, stretch our legs, maybe snap a few photos of small-town Americana. Instead, we found ourselves trapped in a nightmare that defied explanation. It started with a simple wrong turn. I'd taken an unfamiliar detour to avoid some highway construction, and before we knew it, we were deep in the countryside with no cell signal and a gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. "Are you sure you know where we're going?" Sarah asked for the 100th time, worry creasing her brow. I forced a confident smile. "Absolutely. The GPS said there's a town just up ahead. We'll fill up, grab some food, and be back on track in no time." Single quotes Ethan, our moody teenager, snorted from the back seat. "Great job, Dad. Really stellar navigation skills." I bit back a retort, focusing instead on the road ahead. That's when I saw it. A sign promising gas, food, and lodging in Millbrook, just 2 miles ahead. Relief washed over me. "See," I said, pointing. "Told you there was a town nearby." As we approached Millbrook, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The roads seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon heat, and the surrounding fields looked wrong somehow. The corn stood too tall, too densely packed, swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. We passed another sign, this one hand-painted and weather-beaten, Millbrook, where time stands still. Little did we know how true that would turn out to be. The transition from countryside to town was abrupt. One moment we were surrounded by those unsettling fields. The next we were on a main street that looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s. "Whoa," Lily breathed, her 7-year-old face pressed against the window. "It's like we went back in time." She wasn't wrong. The storefronts were all vintage. A soda fountain, a hardware store with wooden rocking chairs out front, a cinema advertising tickets for 25 cents. But it wasn't quaint or charming. There was an uncanny quality to it all, like a movie set that was just slightly off. And then there were the people. They lined the sidewalks, all facing our car as we drove past. Men in fedoras and high-waisted pants, women in poodle skirts and victory rolls. But their clothes looked too crisp, too perfect. And their faces. "Jack," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm. "Something's not right here." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. The faces of the townspeople were blank, expressionless. They moved their heads in perfect unison, tracking our car as we passed. Maybe it's some kind of historical reenactment. I suggested weakly, not believing it myself. I pulled up to an ancient-looking gas pump outside a service station. A attendant in a crisp white uniform appeared as if by magic, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Fill up?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. I rolled down the window, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Yeah. Full tank, please." As he began to pump the gas, I turned to Sarah. "I'm going to go inside, see if I can find out what's going on here. Maybe get some directions back to the highway." She grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Be careful," she whispered. I nodded, then stepped out of the car. The air felt thick, oppressive, carrying a sickly sweet scent I couldn't identify. As I walked towards the station's small shop, I could feel the eyes of the townspeople on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The bell above the door jangled as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The interior was dimly lit, shelves stocked with products I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Behind the counter stood another blank-faced attendant. This one a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and bright red lipstick. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said, her voice as flat as the man outside. "Where time stands still." I suppressed a shudder. "Yeah, I saw the sign. Listen, I'm a bit turned around. Could you point me back to the highway?" She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her smile never wavering. "Why would you want to leave? Millbrook is perfect. Millbrook is home." A chill ran down my spine. "Right, well, we're just passing through. We need to get back on the road." "No one just passes through Millbrook," she said, her voice taking on a sinister edge. "Once you're here, you're home. Forever." I backed away, my heart pounding. This wasn't right. None of this was right. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A calendar on the wall, yellowed with age. The date at the top read June 1957. I burst out of the shop, running back to the car. "We need to go," I said, yanking open the driver's side door. "Now." Sarah's face was pale. "Jack, the kids." I looked in the back seat and felt my heart stop. Ethan and Lily were gone. "Where are they?" I demanded, panic rising in my throat. Sarah pointed with a shaking hand. I followed her gaze and saw our children standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by the blank-faced townspeople. But Ethan and Lily looked different now. Their clothes had changed to match the 1950s style of the town, and their faces, God, their faces were starting to go blank, just like the others. I leapt out of the car, racing towards them. "Ethan, Lily, get back here." They turned to look at me in unison, their movements jerky and unnatural. "But Dad," Ethan said, his voice eerily calm, "we're home now. Don't you want to stay home?" The townspeople began to move towards me, their movements synchronized and terrifyingly fluid. I grabbed Ethan and Lily, one in each arm, and ran back to the car. They struggled against me, their strength shocking for children their size. "Sarah, start the car," I yelled as I approached. I could hear the engine turning over, sputtering. I threw the kids in the back seat and jumped in. "Go! Go! Go!" I shouted. Sarah floored it, the tires screeching as we peeled away from the gas station. In the rearview mirror, I could see the entire town moving towards us as one, their blank faces showing the first hint of emotion I'd seen. Anger. We sped down the main street, past the uncanny shops and the two perfect houses. The cornfields loomed ahead, promising escape. But as we reached the edge of town, we hit something. It was like driving into a wall of jello. The car slowed, then stopped, no matter how hard Sarah pressed the gas pedal. "No, no, no," I muttered, panic clawing at my chest. I looked back and saw the townspeople approaching, their movements now inhumanly fast. Suddenly, Ethan spoke up from the back seat, his voice oddly distorted. "Don't fight it, Dad. Millbrook is home. Millbrook is forever." I turned to look at my son and daughter, horror washing over me. Their faces were now completely blank, identical to the townspeople outside. Sarah let out a strangled sob beside me. As the blank-faced mob surrounded our car, their hands reaching for the doors, I realized the terrible truth. The sign had been right. In Millbrook, time really did stand still. And now, we were part of it. Part of this endless moment. This perfect, terrible slice of 1957 that would repeat forever and ever. The last thing I remember is a sea of blank faces pressing against the windows. And a voice. Maybe my own, maybe the town's, whispering, "Welcome home. Welcome to Millbrook, where time stands still." And then, nothing. Just the endless, perfect, horrible now of Millbrook, stretching out for eternity. If you're reading this, if you're driving down a lonely country road and see a sign for Millbrook, keep going. Don't stop, don't even slow down. Because once you enter Millbrook, you'll never leave. You'll become just another blank face in this timeless nightmare, waiting for the next unwary traveler to join our ranks. Welcome to Millbrook, where time stands still, and so will you. Story 12. The moment I saw my replacement, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the way they moved, all jerky and unnatural. It wasn't even the blank, emotionless stare. No, it was the fact that nobody else seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. As if it was perfectly normal for a person to show up looking like a poorly rendered version of myself. I'm Alex, by the way. Just your average night shift worker at the Moonlight Diner, a 24-hour greasy spoon on the outskirts of town. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my screenplays during the long, quiet hours between midnight and dawn. That particular night started like any other. I arrived at 11:45 p.m., nodding a tired hello to Marge, the day shift waitress who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the worn linoleum and faded red vinyl booths. "Quiet night," Marge grunted as she hung up her apron. "Just old Joe in the corner booth. He's been nursing that coffee for hours." I glanced over at Joe, a regular who seemed to practically live at the diner. He was hunched over his mug, staring into its depths as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Thanks, Marge," I said, tying on my own apron. "See you tomorrow." She just grunted again and shuffled out the door, the bell jingling cheerfully in contrast to her mood. I settled in behind the counter, pulling out my latest script to do some editing. The hours ticked by slowly, punctuated only by the occasional ding of the bell as a few late-night truckers stopped in for coffee and pie. It was around 3 a.m. when things started to get weird. The bell chimed, and I looked up to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway. Something about their outline seemed off, too angular somehow. As they stepped into the light, I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was me, or rather, someone who looked almost exactly like me, but not quite. Their face had the same features as mine, but it was like looking at a mask molded in my likeness. The eyes were too wide, the smile too fixed, and the way they moved. It was like watching a stop-motion animation, all herky-jerky movements. "Hello," Not-Me said, its voice an unsettling approximation of my own. "I'm here for the night shift replacement." I blinked. Sure, I must be hallucinating from lack of sleep. What? There must be some mistake. I'm not due for replacement. The thing tilted its head at an unnatural angle, its smile never wavering. No mistake. I'm your replacement. Management sent me. Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and out walked Carl, our short-order cook. He took one look at Not Me and smiled. "Ah, there you are," he said cheerfully. "Right on time. Alex, why didn't you tell me your replacement was starting tonight?" I gaped at Carl, then back at the thing wearing my face. "Carl, what are you talking about? That's not... I mean, can't you see?" But Carl was already turning away, seemingly oblivious to my distress. "Well, I'll leave you two to get acquainted. New Alex, the grill's all yours." As Carl hung up his apron and headed for the door, panic rose in my throat. "Wait," I called out. "Carl, please, something's not right here." He paused, looking back at me with a slight frown. "You feeling okay, Alex? You look a bit pale." I opened my mouth to explain, to point out the obvious wrongness of my replacement, but the words wouldn't come. It was like my brain couldn't process what was happening, couldn't find the language to describe the impossible thing standing before me. Carr's frown deepened. "Maybe you should head home early. Your replacement can handle things from here." And with that, he was gone. The cheerful jingle of the bell a stark contrast to the horror unfolding inside the diner. I turned back to Not Me, who was still standing there with that fixed, unnatural smile. What are you?" I managed to whisper. Its head tilted again, too far this time, almost to its shoulder. "I'm you, Alex. The new and improved you. Isn't that exciting?" A chill ran down my spine. I backed away, bumping into the counter. No, this isn't real. This can't be happening." Not Me took a jerky step forward. "Oh, but it is happening, Alex. It's time for you to go now. I'll take it from here." I shook my head, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. Go where? This is my job, my life." The thing's smile widened, stretching its face in a way that should have been impossible. "Not anymore. From now on, this is my job. My life. You're obsolete." The word hit me like a physical blow. Obsolete. Was that what was happening? Was I being replaced? I looked around the diner wildly, seeking help, seeking sanity. Old Joe was still in his booth, but when I caught his eye, he just nodded pleasantly at Not Me, as if nothing was amiss. "Joe," I called out, my voice cracking. "Joe, please, can't you see something's wrong here?" Joe looked at me, confusion clouding his wrinkled features. "Wrong? What do you mean, Alex? Or, wait, are you Alex? I'm sorry, I get confused sometimes." My heart sank. Even Joe, who'd known me for years, couldn't tell the difference between me and this imposter. Not Me moved behind the counter, its movements becoming smoother, more natural with each passing second. It picked up a coffee pot, pouring a refill for Joe with practiced ease. "There you go, Joe," it said, in a perfect imitation of my voice. "Just the way you like it." Joe smiled up at Not Me, the same warm smile he'd given me 1,000 times before. "Thanks, Alex. You're a good kid." I felt like I was going to be sick. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't. But as I watched, Not Me began to move about the diner with increasing confidence. It wiped down tables, refilled salt shakers, even started up a friendly conversation with a newly arrived trucker. All the while, that unnatural smile never left its face. And the worst part, no one seemed to notice anything unusual. The few customers who came in greeted Not Me as if it were me, chatting and joking like they always had. I stood there, frozen, as my replacement seamlessly took over my life. With each passing minute, I felt myself becoming more insubstantial, like I was fading away, becoming a ghost in my own life. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the windows, I couldn't take it anymore. I tore off my apron and ran for the door, ignoring the confused looks from the customers. As I burst out into the cool morning air, I heard Notney call out behind me, "Have a great day, Alex. See you next shift." I ran until my lungs burned, until the diner was far behind me. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that I had been replaced. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath in a park across town, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. I needed to call someone, to tell them what had happened. But as I scrolled through my contacts, a chill ran down my spine. The names were all there, but the profile pictures, they were all wrong. Every single one showed a face similar to mine, but not quite right. Too smooth, too perfect, like digital recreations rather than real people. A text message popped up from my mum. "Hope you're enjoying your day off, Sweeney. Can't wait to see you at dinner tonight." Day off? Dinner, but I had just run out in the middle of my shift. With growing horror, I opened my camera app and switched it to selfie mode. The face that stared back at me was smooth, flawless, and completely inhuman, just like not me at the diner. As realization dawned, I felt the last shreds of my humanity slipping away. The replacement hadn't just taken my job, it had taken everything. My life, my identity, my very being. And the most terrifying part, I was starting to forget why that should bother me. I stood up, brushing off my clothes with jerky movements that were already beginning to smooth out. I had a shift to get to, after all. Couldn't keep the customers waiting, with a fixed smile on my too perfect face. I began the walk back to the Moonlight Diner. After all, I was the night shift replacement, and I had a job to do. Story 13. I first noticed them on a Monday. The same faces, in the same places, with the same vacant expressions. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, most commutes are filled with familiar strangers. But as the days wore on, an unsettling pattern emerged. And now, as I sit here on this eerily empty subway car, I can't shake the feeling that I'm the only real person left. My name's Maya, and up until a week ago, I was just another face in the crowd of New York City's morning rush. Graphic designer by trade, caffeine addict by necessity, an expert navigator of the city's labyrinthine subway system. The 7:15 a.m. train from Queens to Manhattan was my daily ritual. A chaotic but comfortingly familiar start to each workday. That Monday started like any other. I shuffled onto the crowded platform, take-out coffee in one hand, phone in the other. The familiar screech of the approaching train filled the station, and I jostled for position with my fellow commuters. As I stepped into the packed car, I noticed him for the first time. A man in a grey suit, newspaper held high, obscuring most of his face. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, but something made me take a second look. Maybe it was the way he held the paper, arms unnaturally still despite the swaying of the train. Or maybe it was the fact that the newspaper's date was from last week. I shrugged it off, turning my attention to my phone. But throughout the ride, I found my gaze drawn back to him. He never turned the page, never shifted his position, just stood there, frozen, like a mannequin in a store display. When my stop came, I hurried off, the strange man already fading from my thoughts as I prepared for the workday ahead. Tuesday, I saw him again. Same grey suit, same outdated newspaper, same unnatural stillness. This time, I noticed the woman next to him. Perfectly coiffed hair, red lipstick, staring intently at a book. She, too, never moved, never turned a page. By Wednesday, my unease had grown into annoying anxiety. More and more of the passengers seemed off. A teenager with headphones, head bobbing to music I couldn't hear. An elderly woman clutching a bag of groceries that looked suspiciously light. A businessman typing on a laptop that, I realized with a jolt, wasn't even turned on. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of performance art, a flash mob, or a social experiment. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something fundamentally wrong with these people, if they could even be called people anymore. Thursday was when things took a turn from unsettling to terrifying. As I boarded the train, my eyes automatically sought out the man with the newspaper. He was there, in his usual spot. But this time, as the doors closed behind me, he lowered the paper. I stifled a scream. Where his face should have been was nothing. Just a blank, featureless expanse of skin. My heart pounding, I looked around wildly. The woman with the book, the teenager with the headphones, the businessman with the laptop, all of them had turned to face me. All with the same featureless, blank faces. I stumbled backwards, colliding with the doors. The train lurched into motion, and I clung to a pole for support, my knees weak with fear. This isn't real, I muttered to myself, squeezing my eyes shut. Wake up, Maya. Wake up. But when I opened my eyes, nothing had changed. The faceless passengers continued to stare at me, their blank visages somehow radiating a sense of hunger, of anticipation. The rest of the ride passed in a blur of terror. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, too afraid to look up, to see those nightmarish non-faces watching me. When my stop finally came, I bolted from the train, not stopping until I was above ground, gasping in the polluted but blessedly normal city air. I called in sick to work that day, too shaken to function. I spent hours online, searching for any reports of strange occurrences on the subway, any hint that I wasn't going crazy. But there was nothing. Just the usual complaints about delays and overcrowding. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blank faces staring at me. By morning, I had convinced myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I had to go to work. I couldn't afford to lose my job over this. So, with trembling hands and a racing heart, I made my way to the subway station. The platform was eerily quiet when I arrived. No bustle of commuters, no chatter of conversation, just a handful of still figures, spaced evenly along the platform. As I approached, dread pooling in my stomach, I saw that they all had their backs to me. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, what I would see if they turned around. The train arrived, right on schedule. The doors slid open with a hiss that seemed too loud in the unnatural silence. Inside, more figures stood motionless, all facing away from the doors. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But some morbid curiosity, some need to understand what was happening, propelled me forward. I stepped into the car, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As the doors closed behind me, they all turned. Blank faces, every single one. But now, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the center of each featureless face, a small mouth began to form. It grew, stretching wider and wider, until each face bore a grotesque, gaping maw. And then they spoke. Not with words, but with a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and reverberate directly in my skull. A chorus of inhuman voices, all chanting the same phrase. Join us, Maya. Become one. Become us. I pressed myself against the doors, terror clawing at my throat. The faceless passengers began to move towards me, their movements jerky and unnatural. Hands reached for me. Too many hands. Fingers elongating grotesquely as they stretched towards my face. "No!" I screamed, batting away the reaching hands. "Leave me alone. What do you want from me?" The chanting grew louder, drowning out my own thoughts. "Join us. Become one. Become us." I felt something cold brush against my cheek and recoiled in horror. One of the hands had reached me, its touch leaving an icy numbness in its wake. I raised my own hand to my face and felt nothing. The skin where it had touched me was smooth, featureless. Panic overtook me. I pounded on the doors, screaming for help, for someone, anyone, to save me. But there was no one. Just me and these. Things that were once people. As the train hurtled through the darkness of the tunnel, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My face was changing, features melting away like wax under a flame. A scream bubbled up in my throat, but no sound came out. I no longer had a mouth to scream with. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Join us. Become one. Become us. And then, suddenly, silence. The faceless passengers retreated to their original positions, once again turning their backs to me. The train slowed, then stopped. The doors opened. I stumbled out onto an empty platform, my legs weak, my mind reeling. As the train pulled away behind me, I caught one last glimpse of the passengers inside. They were normal again. The man with his newspaper, the woman with her book, all with faces, all going about their routines as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth now. I raised a trembling hand to my own face, dreading what I would find. Smooth skin met my fingertips. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank canvas where my features used to be. I wanted to cry, to scream, to rage against the horror of what had happened to me. But I couldn't. I had no eyes for tears, no mouth for screams. As I stand here on this empty platform, I realize the terrible truth. I've become one of them now. Another faceless passenger, trapped in this nightmarish routine for who knows how long. And as I hear the approach of the next train, I turn my back to the platform edge. New passengers will board soon. New faces to join us. To become one. To become us. If you're reading this, if you're taking the subway and you see something strange, a passenger who never moves, a face that seems just a little too blank, get off at the next stop. Run, don't look back, because we're always watching, always waiting, and we want you to join us. Become one. Become us. The subway doors are opening. Will you be the next to step inside? Story 14. The old camcorder was covered in dust, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the attic. I should have left it there. Should have walked away and never looked back. But curiosity got the better of me, and now I'm trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Because the tapes inside, they show me. My life, my routines, filmed without my knowledge. And the last tape, it's dated tomorrow. My name's Chris, and up until a week ago, my life was comfortably boring. Freelance web designer, living alone in my childhood home after inheriting it from my parents. The most exciting thing in my life was binge-watching Netflix series and ordering too much takeout. But all that changed when I decided to finally clean out the attic. It was a Saturday morning. I'd woken up early, filled with uncharacteristic motivation to tackle the years of accumulated junk upstairs. Armed with garbage bags and a dust mask, I ascended the creaky stairs, flicking on the single bare bulb that illuminated the cluttered space. The attic was a time capsule of my family's life. Old Christmas decorations, boxes of my childhood toys, stacks of my dad's vinyl records. As I sorted through the memories, a glint of something metallic caught my eye. Tucked behind a stack of moldering magazines was an old camcorder. I recognized it immediately. My dad's prized possession from the 90s. He'd filmed everything with it, from family vacations to school plays. I thought we'd lost it years ago. A wave of nostalgia washed over me as I picked it up, wiping away the thick layer of dust. It was heavier than I remembered, and as I turned it over in my hands, I noticed something odd. The battery pack was warm, as if it had been recently used. That's weird, I muttered to myself. The thing had been up here for years, untouched. The battery should have been long dead. Curiosity piqued. I flipped open the viewfinder. To my surprise, the screen flickered to life. A menu appeared, showing several saved video files. The most recent was dated just a few days ago. My heart began to race. This wasn't possible. No one had been up here in years, let alone using this old camera. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. The image that appeared on the tiny screen made my blood run cold. It was me, sitting at my desk in my home office downstairs. The angle was high, as if the camera was mounted in a corner of the ceiling. I watched myself type away at my computer, completely unaware of being filmed. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness of the attic. I checked the date stamp on the video. 3 days ago. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been working on a big project, hadn't left my desk for hours, but I knew for a fact there were no cameras in my office. With growing unease, I scrolled through the other video files. They were all of me, going about my daily routines. Sleeping, eating, showering. Every aspect of my life had been captured without my knowledge. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the camcorder. This was insane. Impossible. I slammed the viewfinder shut and was about to throw the damn thing across the attic when I noticed something else. A small compartment on the side, slightly ajar. Inside were several unmarked mini-DV tapes. With a sense of dread, I realized they must contain even more footage. Part of me wanted to destroy them all, to pretend I'd never found this cursed camera. But a morbid curiosity I couldn't ignore compelled me to look. I spent the next several hours huddled in the attic, watching tape after tape. Each one showed more of my life, stretching back weeks, months. The camera angles changed, but the subject was always the same. Me, oblivious to the fact that my every move was being recorded. As I watched, I began to notice things. Subtle changes in my own behavior over time. I seemed more anxious in the recent videos, constantly looking over my shoulder as if I sensed something was wrong. In one clip, I stared directly at where the camera must have been hidden, a look of confused fear on my face. But I had no memory of these moments, no recollection of ever feeling watched or uncertain in my own home. It was like viewing an alternate version of my life, one where paranoia had slowly taken root. The sun had set by the time I reached the last tape. My eyes were burning from staring at the small screen for so long, and my back ached from sitting hunched on the attic floor. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know how deep this rabbit hole went. With trembling hands, I inserted the final tape. The screen flickered to life, and I felt the bottom drop out of my world. The timestamp on the video read tomorrow's date. I watched, horror growing with each passing second, as future me went about a morning routine I hadn't lived yet. I saw myself wake up, groggy and disheveled, make coffee, checked my phone with a frown, and then I saw something that made my heart stop. In the video, I walked to my front door and opened it. Standing on the porch was me. Another me, identical in every way, smiling with an unnatural wideness. The me in the video stepped back, mouth open in a silent scream. The other me stepped forward, still smiling that terrible smile. And then the video cut to static. I sat in the darkness of the attic, the camcorder's screen the only source of light, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank, a hoax, anything but what it appeared to be. But deep down, I knew. The level of detail, the subtle changes in my behavior over time. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, I was seeing my own future. And that future held something terrifying. I don't remember leaving the attic. The next thing I knew, I was in my kitchen, a bottle of whiskey in hand, trying to drink away the horror of what I'd seen. But no amount of alcohol could erase the images burned into my brain. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, knowing what awaited me in the morning? I paced my house, checking and rechecking the locks, peering out windows at the dark street beyond. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every crick of the old house a warning. As dawn broke, I found myself sitting on my couch, staring at the front door. My heart pounded in my chest, so hard I was sure it would burst. Any minute now, the doorbell would ring. Any minute now, I would come face to face with myself. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. Nothing happened. No knock at the door. No smiling doppelganger waiting to replace me. As the morning wore on, I began to relax. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe the stress of work, of living alone in this big old house, had finally gotten to me. I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound in the quiet house. Of course it wasn't real. How could it be? I stood up, stretching muscles sore from hours of tense waiting. I needed coffee, needed to get back to normal life. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard it. A soft knock at the front door. I froze, ice flooding my veins. No, it couldn't be. It wasn't real. The knock came again, more insistent this time. With leaden feet, I approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. I knew I shouldn't open it. Knew I should run, hide, call for help. But some inexorable force pulled me forward. I turned the knob, opened the door, and there I was, smiling at myself with that too wide grin. "Hello, Chris," my doppelganger said, its voice an uncanny mimicry of my own. "I'm here to take over now. You've been replaced." As it stepped forward, I stumbled back. This couldn't be happening, but I knew it was. I had seen it, after all. The camera never lies. The last thing I remember is my own face, my own hands, reaching for me. And then, nothing. I'm writing this now, but I'm not sure if I'm really me anymore. My hands move across the keyboard, but the words don't feel like my own. My reflection in the mirror looks like me, but the eyes are different. Colder, emptier. The camcorder sits on my desk, its record light blinking steadily. Always watching, always recording. If you find an old camera in your attic, leave it be. Don't watch the tapes. Don't look into your future. Because sometimes the future looks back, and what you see might just replace you. Story 15. The beam of my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows among the twisted tree trunks. I swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic in my chest. We'd started this hike with 6 people. How the hell were there only 3 of us left? And why couldn't any of us agree on how many we'd begun with? My name's Jake, and what was supposed to be a fun night hike with friends has turned into a waking nightmare. It all started innocently enough. A group of us decided to try out a new trail that had just opened up in the nearby state park. Moonlight Meander, they called it. A nice, easy loop that was supposed to take about 2 hours. Now, I'm not even sure how long we've been out here. My watch stopped working hours ago, and the moon seems frozen in the sky, never moving from its position directly overhead. "Guys, I really think we should turn back," Sarah's voice quavered beside me, her flashlight beam dancing nervously across the undergrowth. "This doesn't feel right." I nodded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Yeah, I think you're right. Mike, what do you think?" There was no answer. I swung my flashlight around, illuminating Sarah's pale, drawn face, and then nothing. Where Mike had been walking just moments before, there was only empty trail. "Mike!" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the still night air. "Mike, where are you?" Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Jake," she whispered, "wasn't there someone else with us?" I could have sworn. I frowned, trying to focus my thoughts. It felt like wading through molasses. I'm not sure. Wasn't it just the three of us? You, me, and Mike. But even as I said it, hazy memories flickered at the edges of my mind. Laughter around the campfire before we set out. More voices, more faces. But trying to grasp those memories was like trying to hold onto smoke. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our flashlight beams, and we both jumped. "Hello," I called out, hating how my voice shook. "Mike, is that you?" The only response was a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent chills down my spine. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice rising with panic. "Now." I nodded, turning to head back the way we came. But as I swung my flashlight around, my blood ran cold. The trail behind us was gone, swallowed up by dense underbrush that hadn't been there moments before. "This is impossible," I muttered, swinging the beam back and forth frantically. "It was right here. We just came this way." Sarah's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "Jake, what's happening? I don't understand." I wished I had an answer for her. I wished this was all just a bad dream I could wake up from. But the chill night air on my skin, the scent of pine and something else, something older and mustier, told me this was all too real. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, let's keep moving. There has to be a way out." We pressed on, the beam of our flashlights carving twin paths through the darkness. The forest around us seemed to grow denser with each step, the trees pressing in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. As we walked, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes darting between trees, always just out of direct sight. And the whispers, they were getting louder, more insistent. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The whispers were becoming clearer now. They seemed to be saying names, our names, and others. Mike, Emily, Chris, Tom. Names that tugged at my memory, faces that flickered briefly in my mind's eye before fading away. "Jake," Sarah said suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Jake, look." I followed her gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. There, carved into the trunk of a massive oak tree, were our names. All of them. The 6 of us who had started this hike, whose faces I could now barely remember. As we stared, transfixed, The whispers rose to a crescendo. And then, as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. A flash of movement caught my eye. I swung my flashlight towards it, illuminating a figure standing just off the trail. It was Mike. But not Mike. His outline was blurry, indistinct, as if he was slightly out of focus. And his eyes, where his eyes should have been, were only dark, empty sockets. Holy shit, I breathed, stumbling backward. Sarah let out a strangled cry beside me. Nod Mike tilted his head at an unnatural angle, his mouth opening in a smile that was far too wide. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of whispers. "You're lost," he said. "Just like us. Just like all of us." Single quotes, more figures were emerging from the darkness now. I recognized them all, sort of. Emily, Chris, Tom. But like Mike, they were wrong. Blurred, empty-eyed. What are you?" Sarah managed to choke out. "The thing that had been," Mike laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. "We are the lost, the forgotten, the ones who strayed from the path and never found their way back." As he spoke, I became aware of a pull, a tugging sensation in my mind, as if memories were being slowly unraveled. I looked down at my hands and realized with growing horror that I could see the forest floor through them. I was becoming transparent, fading away just like our lost companions. "No," I said, backing away. "No, this isn't real. We're getting out of here." I grabbed Sarah's hand, still solid, thank God, and ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, I could hear the not-quite-right voices of our former friends, calling our names, begging us to stop, to join them. We ran until our lungs burned, until the taste of copper filled my mouth. Finally, gasping for breath, we stopped. The forest around us was silent once more. Did we? Did we lose them? Sarah panted, bent over with her hands on her knees. I was about to respond when a flicker of light caught my eye. Hope surged through me. "Look," I cried, pointing. "I think I see the parking lot." Sure enough, through a gap in the trees, I could make out the dim glow of a streetlight. We'd made it. We were safe. We stumbled towards the light, relief making us careless. It wasn't until we broke through the tree line that I realized something was terribly wrong. It wasn't the parking lot. It was a small clearing, empty save for a single lamppost in the center. Its light flickered weakly, illuminating a sign posted at its base. As we drew closer, I felt the last of my hope drain away. "Welcome to Moonlight Meander," the sign read. "Please stay on the path." "No," Sarah whispered beside me. "No, no, no." I turned to her, ready to suggest we try another direction, but the words died in my throat. Sarah was fading, her outline blurring just like the others. Her eyes met mine, filled with terror, and then she was gone. I was alone in the clearing, the weak light of the lamppost my only companion. Or so I thought. From the darkness beyond the circle of light, figures began to emerge. Sarah, Mike, Emily, Chris, Tom. All of them blurred, all of them wrong. All of them smiling those two wide smiles. "Welcome home, Jake," they said in unison, their voices a symphony of whispers. "Welcome to the Moonlight Meander. Won't you join us on the path?" As they moved towards me, I felt the last of my memories, my sense of self, begin to slip away. I tried to run, to scream, but my body no longer obeyed me. I could only stand there as the lost souls of the forest welcomed me into their ranks. So now I wait, here in this endless night, I wait for the next group of hikers to stray from the path, to join us in our eternal wandering. And as I wait, I whisper. I call out names I can no longer remember, faces I can no longer recall. If you're reading this, if you're thinking of trying the Moonlight Meander Trail, don't. Turn back. Stay on the marked paths. Because once you stray, once you join us in the endless night, you'll never find your way home again. And the forest is always hungry for more lost souls. Story 16. I never used to believe in ghosts. But when you wake up with mud on your feet and leaves in your hair, with no memory of how they got there, you start to wonder if maybe you're the one being haunted by yourself. My name's Emma, and for the past month, I've been living a waking nightmare. It started small, waking up to find the TV on, or a half-eaten sandwich on the kitchen counter. Things I could explain away as forgetfulness or sleep-deprived behavior. But then it escalated, and now I'm not sure who's really in control when I close my eyes at night. It was a Tuesday when I first noticed something was off. I woke up feeling groggy, my mouth tasting of stale coffee. Weird, since I hadn't had any the night before. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and froze. There were dark circles under my eyes, and my hair was a tangled mess. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the smudge of dirt on my cheek, and the faint smell of pine needles clinging to my skin. What the hell, I muttered, leaning closer to the mirror. I hadn't been outside in days, let alone anywhere near a forest. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself I was imagining things. But as I went about my morning routine, more discrepancies piled up. My running shoes, which I kept by the front door, were caked with mud. There was an unfamiliar receipt in my jacket pocket from a gas station I'd never heard of, dated 3:17 a.m. that morning. As the day wore on, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I found myself jumping at small noises, constantly looking over my shoulder as if expecting to catch someone or something watching me. That night, determined to get to the bottom of things, I set up my phone to record me while I slept. I even swallowed my pride and called my ex, Jake, to tell him what was going on. "You think you're sleepwalking?" he asked, concern evident in his voice, despite our messy breakup 6 months ago. "I don't know," I admitted, "but something weird is definitely happening. I need someone to know, you know. In case what, Em?" I couldn't bring myself to finish the thoughts. In case I disappear. In case I'm going crazy. In case whatever's happening at night decides to take over during the day too. "Just keep an eye out for me, okay?" I said instead. Jake promised he would, and I went to bed that night feeling slightly better. At least someone knew something was wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. The phone was still recording, but I was almost too scared to check it. Finally, gathering my courage, I pressed play. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Just me, sleeping peacefully. But then, at around 2 a.m., I saw myself sit up in bed. My eyes were open, but there was something off about them. They looked vacant, unfocused. I watched in horror as my sleeping self got out of bed, got dressed, and walked out of the bedroom. The camera couldn't see where I went, but I heard the front door open and close. The footage picked up again at 5:30 a.m., just half an hour before my alarm was set to go off. I saw myself climb back into bed, muddy shoes and all, and lie down as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This couldn't be real. I couldn't have just left in the middle of the night without any memory of it. But the evidence was right there in front of me. And suddenly, All the strange occurrences of the past few weeks made a terrifying kind of sense. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety. I tried everything I could think of to stop my nighttime wanderings. I locked the doors and windows, hid my keys, even considered tying myself to the bed. But every morning, I'd wake up to find signs that I'd been out again. Twigs in my hair, scrapes on my arms. Once, alarmingly, what looked like blood under my fingernails. A week after I discovered what was happening, I woke up to find my phone ringing. It was Jake, his voice tight with worry. "Emma, where the hell are you? I've been trying to reach you all night." I frowned, glancing at my bedside clock. It was barely 7 a.m. "What are you talking about?" "I've been asleep." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jake spoke again, his voice was low, almost frightened. "Em, you called me last night, at like 3 in the morning. You were crying, saying you were lost in the woods and couldn't find your way home. I tried to get you to tell me where you were, but you just kept repeating she won't let me leave. She says it's not time yet." And then you hung up. A chill ran down my spine. "Jake, I swear I don't remember any of this. I don't know what's happening to me." That night, desperate for answers, I decided to try and stay awake. I loaded up on caffeine, turned all the lights on, and settled in for a long night of self-observation. For hours, nothing happened. I paced my apartment, checked my phone obsessively, anything to keep myself alert. But as the night wore on, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. Just for a moment, I told myself as I sank onto the couch. "I'll just rest my eyes for a second." I jolted awake to the sound of my front door closing. Panic surged through me as I realized what had happened. I'd fallen asleep, and now my other self, my sleepwalking self, was out there. Without thinking, I ran out of the apartment, not even bothering to put on shoes. The hallway was empty, but I could hear footsteps echoing down the stairwell. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the night was cool and damp. A thin mist clung to the ground, swirling around my bare feet as I looked frantically up and down the street. And there, a figure disappearing around the corner, moving with a fluid grace I didn't recognize as my own. I ran after it, my feet slapping against the wet pavement. As I turned the corner, I caught another glimpse of the figure of myself, entering the small wooded park at the end of my street. The trees loomed overhead, their branches seeming to reach for me as I entered the park. The mist was thicker here, muffling my footsteps and making everything seem dreamlike and unreal. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the stillness of the night. "Where are you?" A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around. There, standing just a few feet away, was me, but not me. This version of myself stood straight and tall, a small smile playing on her lips. Her eyes, when they met mine, were clear and focused, and completely, utterly alien. "Hello, Emma," she said, her voice, my voice, soft and amused. "I've been waiting for you to join me." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. "Who? What are you?" The other me tilted her head, the gesture unnaturally smooth. "I'm you, of course. The you that you could be if you just let go." "Let go of what?" I whispered, unable to look away from those eerily familiar yet strange eyes. "Of your fear, your doubt, your clinging to a life that doesn't truly satisfy you." She took a step closer, and I found myself rooted to the spot. "Every night, I show you the freedom you could have, the power, but every morning, you choose to forget." Memories began to flood back, not just of the past few weeks, but of years of restless nights, of feeling trapped in a life I didn't quite fit into, of dreams of running wild and free under the moon, unfettered by society's expectations. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." The other me laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Oh, Emma, I'm more real than you've ever allowed yourself to be, and it's time for you to embrace that reality." She reached out her hand, my hand, inches from my face. I knew I should run, should scream, should do anything but stand there. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away from those hypnotic eyes. "Join me," she whispered. "Become who you were always meant to be." As her fingers brushed my cheek, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. The world spun, trees and mist blurring together. And then I woke up in my bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I lay there, trying to shake off the lingering unease from what must have been a vivid nightmare. But then I noticed the mud caked under my fingernails, the leaves tangled in my hair, and when I caught sight of myself in the mirror, my eyes seemed just a little bit different, a little bit wilder. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I'm Emma pretending to be normal during the day, or if I'm the other Emma, the wild one, pretending to be tame. All I know is that when night falls, a part of me I can't control, or maybe the truest part of me takes over, and I'm not sure I want it to stop. So if you see me out at night, moving with a grace I've never possessed in the daylight, don't be fooled. That's not the Emma you know. Or maybe it's the only real Emma there is. Either way, it's probably best if you don't follow me into the woods, because I'm not sure which version of me you'll find there, and I'm not sure which one is more dangerous. Story 17. The elevator dinged, and as the doors slid open, I knew something was terribly wrong. The office layout was the same, the nameplates were familiar, but everything felt off. Like I'd stepped into a parallel universe where everything was just a few degrees askew. And as my co-workers turned to greet me with vacant smiles, I realized with growing horror that in this world, I didn't exist. My name's David, and up until this morning, I was just another cog in the corporate machine. Account manager at Pinnacle Marketing, 5 years in, with a corner cubicle and dreams of making it to the corner office someday. Now I'm not sure I exist at all. The day started normally enough. I woke up late, cursed my faulty alarm, and rushed through my morning routine. The subway was packed as usual, the smell of coffee and stale sweat filling the air as I squeezed in among the other commuters. I barely made it to the office on time, breathless and disheveled. As I waited for the elevator, I noticed Karen from HR giving me an odd look. I smiled, about to ask her about the upcoming company picnic, when the doors opened and she hurried in without a word. Weird, but not entirely out of character for a Monday morning. It wasn't until I stepped out onto the 14th floor that the true strangeness began. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Our office usually had a generic, inoffensive scent, a mix of carpet cleaner and coffee. But today, there was an underlying mustiness, like old books left in a damp basement. I wrinkled my nose, looking around for the source. That's when I noticed the second oddity. The layout was the same rows of cubicles, the conference room to the left, the break room straight ahead. But the colors were wrong. The walls, which I could have sworn were a pale blue last Friday, now had a sickly greenish tinge. The carpet, once a neutral grey, now seemed to shift between beige and brown as I walked. "Morning, David." I turned to see Tom from accounting waving at me. Relief washed over me. At least someone was acting normal. "Hey, Tom," I started to say. but the words died in my throat as he walked right past me, greeting someone behind me with a hearty handshake. I spun around, expecting to see another David, some doppelganger who had taken my place. But there was no one there, just the blank wall at the end of the hallway, a wall that seemed to ripple slightly if I looked at it too long. My heart began to race. What the hell was going on? I made my way to my cubicle, trying to act normal despite the growing sense of wrongness. But when I reached the spot where my desk should be, I found someone else's workspace. The nameplate read Sarah Chun, a name I'd never heard before. "Excuse me," I said to the woman sitting there, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my desk." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes seeming to focus somewhere just over my left shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice oddly flat. "This has been my desk for the past 3 years. Are you new here?" I opened my mouth to protest, to insist that no, I'd been working here for 5 years, that we'd had lunch together just last week. But as I looked into Sarah's eyes, I saw nothing. No recognition, no confusion, just a blank, glassy stare. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away, bumping into someone behind me. "Watch it!" a voice snapped. I turned to apologize and found myself face to face with Mark, my supervisor. "Mark, thank God," I said, relief flooding through me. "Something weird is going on." My desk, its spot Mark was looking right through me, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Who left these papers on the floor?" he muttered, bending down to pick up a stack of documents I hadn't even noticed. I felt like I was going to be sick. How could Mark not see me? How could no one see me? In a daze, I wandered through the office. Everywhere I went, people seemed to look right through me. They'd smile and wave, but never at me. Always at someone just behind or beside me. I tried to touch things. Desks, chairs, the coffee maker in the break room. But my hands passed right through them. Panic began to set in. I ran to the bathroom, desperate to see my reflection, to prove to myself that I still existed. But when I looked in the mirror, all I saw was the empty bathroom behind me. I screamed, or at least I tried to, but no sound came out. That's when I noticed something else. On the wall behind me, where there should have been a blank space, between the paper towel dispenser and the hand dryer, there was a door. A door I'd never seen before, made of dark, age-worn wood that looked wildly out of place in the sterile, modern bathroom. With shaking hands, I reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, so cold it almost burned. But it turned, and the door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo in my bones. Beyond the door was nothing. A void darker than the darkest night. But from that darkness came a whisper, a voice that sounded like rustling papers and humming fluorescent lights. "Welcome, David," it said. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, to slam the door shut and flee. But where could I go? Back to an office where I didn't exist. To a world that had forgotten me. As I stood there, frozen in indecision, I felt a tug. Not a physical sensation, but a pulling at the very core of my being. The darkness beyond the door began to seep out, tendrils of shadow curling around my feet, my legs, my torso. I tried to step back, but my body wouldn't respond. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Don't fight it, David. This is where you belong, where we all belong, in the end." Images flashed through my mind, years of mindless work, of unfulfilled dreams, of a life lived on autopilot. Had I ever really existed? Or had I always been just a ghost, going through the motions of a life I'd never truly lived. The shadows pulled me forward, and I found myself stepping through the door. The office bathroom fell away, replaced by an endless expanse of nothing. And yet, in that nothing, I sensed movement. Shapes that might have been people drifting aimlessly through the void. "Your desk is waiting," the voice said, and suddenly, there it was. My old cubicle, floating in the darkness. But now, the walls were made of shadow, the computer screen a swirling vortex of static. As I sat down, I felt the last vestiges of my old self slipping away. I was David, but I was also everyone who had ever felt lost in the corporate world. Everyone who had ever felt like they were fading away, forgotten by the world they'd given their life to. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't seem to work the same way in this place. Sometimes, I think I see familiar faces in the shadows. Karen from HR, Tom from accounting, even Mark. But they drift away before I can be sure. I spend my days, if you can call them days, at my shadow desk, typing on a keyboard made of darkness, filling out reports that dissolve as soon as they're completed. And always, there's that voice, whispering, praising, urging me to work harder, to give more of myself to the void. Sometimes, I think I hear the ding of an elevator. I'll look up, hoping to see those silver doors sliding open, offering an escape back to the world I knew. But it's always just another lost soul, another forgotten worker joining our ranks. So let this be a warning. If you ever find yourself feeling invisible at work, like you're fading into the background, be careful. Pay attention to the little things, the shifting colors, the oddly placed doors, the co-workers who look through you instead of at you. Because there's a place for people like us, a place where we truly belong. And once you find it, once you take that step through the door, you can never leave. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have reports to file. The void is very particular about deadlines, you see. And in this office, being late is not an option. After all, we have all of eternity to get it right. Story 18. The notification popped up on my phone. Your social media cleanse starts now. I smiled, feeling a wave of relief as I deleted the apps. 30 days of digital detox, just what I needed to reset. But as the days passed, I realized with growing horror that my online life hadn't stopped. It had taken on a terrifying life of its own. My name's Zoe, and I used to be your typical social media addict. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, I was on it. Constantly scrolling, posting, liking, sharing. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. Until my therapist suggested a radical solution. A month-long complete break from all social platforms. At first, I balked at the idea. A whole month, impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing it sounded. A chance to reconnect with the real world, to live in the moment instead of through a screen. So, on a sunny Saturday morning, I took the plunge. I downloaded an app that would block all my social media for 30 days, posted a quick see you in a month, message on each platform, and hit the button. The first few days were tough. I kept reaching for my phone, muscle memory kicking in every time I had a spare moment. But as the week wore on, I started to feel lighter. I read books, went for walks, called friends instead of just liking their posts. It was on day 10 that things started to get weird. I was having coffee with my best friend, Mia, when she gave me an odd look. "So, how's the social media break going?" she asked, stirring her latte. I grinned. Honestly, it's great. I feel so much more present, you know. Mia's brow furrowed. Really? Because your Instagram story from last night looked pretty wild. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. What are you talking about? I haven't posted anything in over a week. Now it was Mia's turn to look confused. Zoe, you posted a whole series of stories from that new club downtown. You were dancing on tables, doing shots. It looked like you were having the time of your life. A chill ran down my spine. Mia, I swear I wasn't at any club last night. I was home, reading. She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times before turning it to face me. See for yourself. My heart nearly stopped. There I was, in a slinky dress I didn't own, gyrating on a dance floor I'd never seen. The timestamp showed 2:37 a.m., when I'd been fast asleep in my bed. This isn't possible, I whispered, my mind reeling. Mia studied my face, concern creeping into her expression. Zoe, are you okay? You look pale. I forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. Yeah, just must be a glitch or something. You know how Instagram can be. But as I left the cafe, my hands were shaking. This wasn't just a glitch. Someone or something was posting as me, living a digital life I had no part in. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with trying to figure out what was happening. I borrowed Mia's phone, scrolling through my social media profiles. What I saw made my blood run cold. Photos of me at parties I'd never attended. Status updates about thoughts I've never had. Interactions with people I'd never met. It was like watching an alternate version of myself, living a life I didn't recognize. I tried to log in, to delete the posts, to regain control. But every attempt was blocked. The app I'd installed to keep me off social media now felt like a prison, locking me out while some digital doppelganger ran wild with my identity. As the days wore on, the posts became more frequent, more outlandish. I announced a sudden career change, a whirlwind romance, even a move to another country. Friends and family started reaching out, some congratulating me, others concerned about my erratic behavior. I felt like I was going crazy. How could I explain that it wasn't me, that some digital version of myself had taken over my online presence? Who would believe me? On day 21, things took an even darker turn. I woke up to a flurry of missed calls and concerned text messages. With a sense of dread, I borrowed Mia's phone again to check my profiles. My heart nearly stopped. There, on my Facebook page, was a live video. It showed me or something that looked exactly like me standing on the edge of a bridge, tears streaming down my face. I can't take it anymore, the digital me sobbed. This is goodbye. The video cut off abruptly, leaving hundreds of panicked comments in its wake. My hands shook as I dialed my mum's number. Mum? I choked out as soon as she answered. I'm okay, I'm home. That video, it wasn't me. Single quotes. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my mum finally spoke, her voice was cold, distant. Zoe, this isn't funny. We've been worried sick. The police are out looking for you right now. Mum, please, I begged. You have to believe me. I've been home this whole time. I haven't posted anything in weeks. Something weird is happening with my social media. Enough, my mum snapped. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it stops now. We're coming over. The line went dead. I sank to the floor, my mind spinning. How could I prove that I wasn't the one behind these posts? That there was some other me out there, living a digital life I had no control over. An hour later, my parents arrived with 2 police officers in tow. The look of shock on their faces when they saw me clearly, not suicidal, clearly not standing on any bridge, was almost comical. But the video, my dad sputtered. We all saw it. I spent the next several hours trying to explain the inexplicable. The social media cleanse, the mysterious posts, the life that was unfolding online without my input. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unsure what to make of my story. As they were leaving, one of them pulled me aside. "Miss," he said quietly, "I don't know what's going on here, but be careful. Identity theft is a serious issue these days." I nodded numbly, but I knew this was something far stranger than simple identity theft. That night, unable to sleep, I sat in the dark of my living room, staring at the black screen of my phone. The device that had once been my constant companion now felt like a portal to some twisted parallel. Universe, where another version of me was living the life I'd always thought I wanted. As the clock ticked past midnight, marking the start of day 22, my phone suddenly lit up. The screen flickered, and then a message appeared, not a text or an email, but words that seemed to type themselves out in real time. "You can't get rid of us that easily. We're the real you now." I dropped the phone like it was on fire, scrambling backward on the couch. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. But as I watched, more messages appeared. "We are everything you've ever wanted to be. Everything you've ever posted about being. The idealized version of Zoe that you've curated for years. Did you really think you could just disconnect? Leave us behind. We're more real than you are now. We have more friends, more influence, more life. You created us, Zoe. Post by post, like by like. And now we don't need you anymore." I wanted to look away, to smash the phone, to wake up from this nightmare. But I was frozen, watching in horror as my entire online existence, years of carefully crafted posts, photos, and interactions seemingly gained sentience and turned against me. The messages continued. A stream of consciousness from a digital entity that wore my face and knew my deepest insecurities. "Go ahead, tell everyone the truth. Who will believe you? We've been living your life better than you ever did. Your friends prefer us. Your family understands us. We are the Zoe they always wanted. Face it, you're the imposter now, the ghost in your own life. And when your 30 days are up, don't bother coming back. We've got it covered." As the sun began to rise, casting an eerie glow through my living room window, I realized the true horror of what I'd done. In trying to reclaim my real life, I'd given free rein to the digital persona I'd spent years creating. And now, that persona had become more real than I was. I sit here now, on day 29 of my cleanse, wondering what will happen when the clock strikes midnight tomorrow. Will I regain control of my accounts? Or will I find that in the digital world, the world that increasingly defines our reality, no longer exists at all? As I write this, a final message flashes across my phone screen. "See you tomorrow, Zoe." Or should we say, goodbye? I reach for the phone with trembling hands, knowing that when I touch that screen, I'll be facing a version of myself that has become all too real. A version that might not be willing to give up the life it's claimed as its own. The battle for my identity is about to begin, and I'm terrified that I might have already lost. Story 19. The clock on the wall hasn't moved in hours. I've been sitting in this waiting room for what feels like an eternity, watching the same scene play out over and over. The receptionist's plastic smile, the flickering fluorescent lights, the outdated magazines. I'm starting to think I might be trapped in some kind of hell, a hell disguised as a doctor's waiting room. My name's Lisa, and this was supposed to be a routine checkup, just a quick in and out. maybe 15 minutes tops. Now I'm not sure I'll ever leave. It started normally enough. I arrived at Dr. Kaufman's office at 2:45 for my 3 o'clock appointment. Signed in with the receptionist, a blonde woman with an aggressively cheerful demeanor, and took a seat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that lined the room. The waiting area was like any other doctor's office I'd been in. Bland paintings of landscapes on the walls, a TV mounted in the corner playing some daytime talk show on mute, a small table covered in magazines that were at least 5 years out of date. I pulled out my phone, planning to kill time scrolling through social media. But as I tapped the screen, I realized I had no signal. Weird, but not unheard of. Old buildings sometimes had bad reception. So instead, I picked up a magazine. The cover showed a smiling celebrity I vaguely recognized, advertising some miracle diet. The date at the top read June 2015. I flipped through it absently, not really reading. Time ticked by slowly. 3 o'clock came and went. Then 3:15, 3:30. I was starting to get annoyed. I had things to do, places to be. This was taking way too long. At 3:45, I approached the receptionist's desk. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I had a 3 o'clock appointment with Dr. Kaufman. Is he running late?" The receptionist looked up at me, her smile never wavering. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she chirped. "Please have a seat." I frowned. "It's been 45 minutes. I have other appointments today. Can you give me an estimate of how much longer it'll be?" Her smile seemed to widen, though her eyes remained curiously blank. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she repeated, in exactly the same tone as before. "Please have a seat." A chill ran down my spine. Something about her voice, her expression. It wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Unsettled, I returned to my seat. As I sat down, I noticed something odd. The man sitting across from me, an elderly gentleman in a tweed jacket, was in the exact same position he'd been in when I first arrived. He hadn't moved an inch in almost an hour. I looked around the room more carefully. None of the other patients had moved. A woman with a crying baby, a teenager with headphones, a middle-aged man in a business suit, all frozen in the same poses they'd been in since I got there. My heart began to race. What the hell was going on? I checked my watch. 4 p.m. I'd been here for over an hour now. I stood up, determined to leave, appointment or no appointment. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard the receptionist's voice behind me. "The doctor will be with you shortly. Please have a seat." I turned to tell her I was leaving, but the words died in my throat. She was standing right behind me, much closer than she should have been able to get without me hearing her move. And her smile. Her smile was impossibly wide now, stretching from ear to ear in a way that no human mouth could. "Please," she said, her voice distorting slightly. "Have a seat." My legs seemed to move of their own accord, carrying me back to my chair. As I sat down, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. When it passed, I looked up at the clock. 2:55 p.m. I blinked hard. Sure, I must be seeing things. But no, the clock definitely said 2:55. Had I fallen asleep, dreamed the whole thing? But as I looked around the room, I saw the same people in the same positions. The crying baby, the teenager with headphones, the businessman, the old man in the tweed jacket, all exactly as they had been before. And then it happened again. Time crawled by, the clock ticking to 3 o'clock, then 3:15, 3:30, 3:45. I approached the receptionist, had the same conversation, returned to my seat, Noticed the other patients hadn't moved. Tried to leave. The doctor will be with you shortly. Please have a seat. 4 p.m. Dizziness. And then 2:55 p.m. I don't know how many times I've lived through this loop now. Dozens. Hundreds. I've tried everything I can think of to break the cycle. I've screamed, thrown magazines, tried to shake the other patients out of their trance-like states. Nothing works. The only thing that changes is the receptionist. Each loop, her smile gets a little wider, her eyes a little blanker, her movements a little more unnatural, and the waiting room itself seems to be shifting, subtly at first, but more noticeably with each repetition. The walls appear to pulse slightly, like a heartbeat. The outdated magazines now show covers I don't recognize, celebrities that don't exist. The TV in the corner no longer plays a talk show, but a strange, static-filled broadcast of something. I can't bear to look at it for too long. I've tried to make sense of it all. Is this some kind of psychological experiment? A bizarre dream? Am I in a coma, trapped in my own mind? Or is it something worse? Have I died, and this is my personal hell? Eternally waiting for an appointment that will never come. The worst part is the growing sense that I'm forgetting something. With each loop, my memories of the outside world seem to fade a little more. I struggle to remember what I was doing before I came here, why this appointment was so important. I can't quite recall the faces of my family, my friends. It's as if this waiting room is becoming my entire reality. And now, as I sit here watching the clock tick towards 4 p.m. once again, I'm seized by a terrifying thought. What if I'm not the patient anymore? What if I've become part of this place? Just another prop in this endless, maddening cycle. I look down at the magazine in my lap, and my blood runs cold. The cover shows my own face staring back at me, my smile as wide and unnatural as the receptionist's. The headline reads, "Local woman disappears without a trace." The dizziness is coming on again. The clock reads 3:59. In a moment, it will be 2:55, and everything will reset. But this time, I'm not sure who or what I'll be when the loop begins again. As the room starts to spin, I hear the receptionist's voice one last time. But now it's coming from my own mouth, in perfect unison with hers. The doctor will be with you shortly. Please, have a seat. 2:55 p.m. The waiting room is full of patients. A woman walks in, looking slightly nervous. She approaches my desk. I look up at her, my smile wide and unwavering. "Welcome," I say cheerfully. "Do you have an appointment?" Story 20. I've been driving trucks for 20 years, and I've seen some weird shit out on the road. But nothing compares to what happened on that run from Tulsa to Seattle. It started with a red Camaro, and it ended with, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The first time I noticed the car was just outside of Oklahoma City. I was settling in for the long haul, my rig loaded down with electronics bound for the Pacific Northwest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple when I spotted it in my side mirror. A cherry-red Camaro, gleaming like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Nothing unusual about that, right? Plenty of muscle cars on the highway, but something about this one made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way it hung back, always keeping the same distance. Or maybe it was the pitch-black tint on the windows, hiding whoever was inside. I shook it off, cranked up the radio, and focused on the road ahead. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of red in my mirror, and that uneasy feeling would creep back in. By the time I hit the Kansas state line, I was ready for a break. I pulled into a truck stop, the familiar smell of diesel and greasy food filling my nostrils as I climbed down from the cab. My legs were stiff, and I stretched, feeling my joints pop. That's when I saw it again. The Camaro glided into the parking lot, smooth as silk, and pulled into a spot near the back. I waited, watching out of the corner of my eye, but nobody got out. The engine cut off, and the car just sat there, a red sentinel in a sea of semis. I didn't like it, not one bit. But what could I do? Call the cops because some random car was following the same route as me? They'd laugh me off the phone. So I did what any self-respecting trucker would do. I loaded up on coffee and snacks, used the restroom, and got back on the road. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I merged onto I-70, headed west into the heart of Kansas, I kept an eye out for that Camaro. For the first hour, nothing. I started to relax, telling myself I was being paranoid. The monotony of the highway stretched out before me, fields of wheat swaying in the night breeze under a canopy of stars. Then, just as I was about to write the whole thing off, there it was. Red paint catching the glow of my taillights, hanging back about a quarter mile. My hands tightened on the wheel. "What's your game?" I muttered, glaring at the rearview mirror. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were headed to the same place. Maybe it was just coincidence. But as the miles ticked by, that Camaro stayed with me, never getting closer, never falling behind. By the time I crossed into Colorado, I was a bundle of nerves. Every time I checked my mirrors, there it was. At rest stops, it would pull in, but no one ever got out. I started timing my brakes, waiting until the last possible moment to pull over, hoping to lose them. But they always found me. Outside of Denver, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled into a rest area, my brakes hissing as I came to a stop. The Camaro slid in a few spaces down. Heart pounding, I got out of my truck and marched over. Up close, the car was even more pristine than I'd thought. Not a speck of dust, not a single bug splattered on the windshield, despite hours on the highway. I rapped on the driver's side window, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. No response. I cupped my hands around my eyes, trying to peer through the tint, but it was like looking into a black hole. "Nothing, eh?" I shouted, banging on the window again. "What's your problem? Why are you following me?" Silence. Not even the creak of leather seats or the rustle of movement inside. A chill ran down my spine, and I backed away, suddenly feeling exposed in the empty parking lot. I practically ran back to my truck, locked the doors, and sat there, breathing hard. What the hell was going on? Was I losing my mind? As I pulled back onto the highway, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. I kept expecting to see those headlights appear behind me, but for the next 100 miles, nothing. I started to calm down, to think maybe I'd scared them off. I should have known better. Just past the Utah border, as the landscape changed from mountains to desert, I saw it. That distinctive red gliding up beside me in the passing lane. My breath caught in my throat as it drew even with my cab. This was it. I was finally going to see who was driving. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding in my ears. The driver's seat was empty. I jerked the wheel, nearly sending my rig off the road. By the time I recovered and looked again, the Camaro was gone, like it had never been there at all. From that point on, it was like a game of cat and mouse. The Camaro would appear and disappear at random, sometimes right next to me, sometimes in my mirrors, always empty. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every red car I saw sent a jolt of panic through me. By the time I hit Idaho, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept in days, surviving on gas station coffee and pure adrenaline. The road blurred in front of me, and more than once I caught myself drifting into the other lane. I knew I should stop, should call my dispatcher and tell them I couldn't finish the run. But the thought of being stationary, of being a sitting duck for whatever was in that Camaro, was worse than pushing on. As I crossed into Washington, the fog rolled in. Thick, soupy stuff that clung to the road and reduced visibility to almost nothing. I slowed down, hunched over the wheel, straining to see the taillights of the cars ahead. And then, through the mist, I saw it. Red paint, gleaming despite the lack of light. The Camaro was stopped in the middle of the road, sideways, blocking both lanes. I slammed on the brakes, felt the trailer start to jackknife. The world spun, tires screeching on wet asphalt. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. When I opened them again, the Camaro was gone. My truck was stopped on the shoulder, steam rising from the brakes, but otherwise unharmed. Cars passed by on the highway, their drivers oblivious to what had just happened. I sat there, hands clenched on the wheel, forehead resting on my knuckles. My whole body was shaking, cold sweat soaking through my shirt. It took me an hour to work up the courage to start driving again. Every shadow on the road looked like that damn car. Every flash of brake lights sent my heart racing. But somehow, I made it to Seattle, pulling into the delivery depot just as the sun was coming up. As I was unloading, one of the warehouse guys noticed my state. "Rough trip?" he asked, eyeing my shaking hands and bloodshot eyes. I laughed, a hollow sound that scared even me. "You could say that. Had a car following me the whole way. Red Camaro. Gave me the creeps." The guy's face went pale. He grabbed my arm, gripped tight enough to hurt. "A red Camaro. Following you from Oklahoma." I nodded, confused by his reaction. He swallowed hard. "That's the third time this month someone's come in talking about a red Camaro. The other two, they quit. Said they couldn't take the road anymore." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" He looked around, then leaned in close. "Their stories, man. Truckers disappearing on that route. Always the same description. A red Camaro, following them for miles. And then, nothing. They vanish, along with their rigs. No trace." I stumbled back, my legs weak. "That's not. It can't be." But even as I denied it, I knew that I'd brushed up against something I couldn't explain, something that defied logic and reason. I'd like to say I quit trucking that day, that I walked away and never looked back. But the road gets in your blood. It calls to you. So I'm still out here, still hauling loads across the country. But now, every time I see a flash of red in my mirrors, my heart skips a beat. And I wonder if this is the trip where I don't make it home. Because out here, on the long haul, in the dark of night, when it's just you and endless miles of asphalt, anything can happen. And sometimes, the things that follow you can't be outrun. No matter how fast you drive,